3 years back, at 19, I kicked off my freshman year in graphic design at a cozy private college. The program was intimate, so by the close of orientation, we'd already bonded over group feedback sessions, clumsy get-to-know-you games, and oversharing way too soon. It resembled a high school group more than a college track. Names stuck quickly. Austin caught my eye immediately. He was in his mid-20s, exuding the vibe of someone who'd lived a full chapter already before rebooting alongside us newbies. He shared with the class about his military service and how the GI Bill funded this follow-up degree. Initially, it painted him as reliable and cool. He'd assist folks with Illustrator or Photoshop, hovering to fix glitches, sharing pro tips on shortcuts, and tossing in relaxed quips. Early on, he posted up across the studio near the windows with the 3D enthusiasts. I registered his presence but didn't dwell on it. Just the vet guy, you know? Gradually, though, he shifted spots. One session, he mentioned the window light bugging him and slid a chair nearer. The following class, he claimed he required a power source and relocated once more. In under 7 days, he'd planted himself in the seat beside me, acting like it was his natural spot now. It crept up so gradually that voicing discomfort would have come off as over the top. Still, he'd peer at my tablet, inquire about my brush choices, praise my compositions. Individually, the remarks were harmless. Combined, though, it seemed he was constantly encroaching on my bubble. On breaks, I'd head to the campus cafe for a brew, and there he'd be, en route too. Occasionally, he'd beat me to the queue. If I lingered for a bite, he'd claim the spot opposite and pivot to queries that strayed from quote 0 toward quote 1, quote 2, quote 3. I gave clipped replies because his intense fixation on me knotted my gut. It wasn't breezy chit-chat. It was like he was charting my entire world. One afternoon, a downpour hit just as class wrapped. I hovered by the exit, fiddling with my phone like I was messaging, buying time to hang back. Austin approached, bag slung over his shoulder, and offered, "Hey, my ride's right out front. Hop in?" I replied, "Appreciate it, but nah, meeting a pal." Total fib. But admitting "I just don't want your company in a vehicle" felt too raw. He ignored the brush-off, lingered there, clogging the door a bit, rambling that he was going that direction regardless, and I'd be drenched before my buddy arrived. Chuckling, he added, Quote 7. He looped the invitation repeatedly as if I'd soon see the error in my caution. Minutes later, I interrupted sharply. "Seriously, no thanks. I'm set. Head out." His gaze flickered with irritation briefly. Then he pasted on a grin and muttered, "Your call," before vanishing into the storm. I second-guessed turning him down, feeling oddly at fault, but relief outweighed it. The following day, pre-class, my peer Taylor eased into the chair on my free side and murmured, "You and Austin dating or what?" "Nope," I shot back. "How come?" She nodded his way, explaining he'd quizzed others on my dorm, job status, relationship scene. Not a one-off, but persistent enough for buzz. My cheeks burned unpleasantly. I clarified we weren't involved and I scarcely knew the guy. She winced sympathetically and let it go. From then on, I dodged any intimate details he probed. If he nudged toward my routine, I'd swerve to school topics or grab my stuff and exit with a group. Roughly a week in, I was hunkered in the student library past 10 p.m., wrapping a poster on one of the Macs. The design crew typically bailed by 6, and Austin's schedule wrapped afternoons, so spotting him was off my radar. Rising for a design book, I spotted him at a table with a clear view of my screen. No device, no notes, just him. Gaze locked my direction. I rationalized he was deep in thought, mid-zone out when I glanced. But resettling and checking again, his stare held steady. No grin, no nod, pure observation. Minutes ticked by with me faking productivity, tension coiling my neck, until I saved my files, powered off, and bolted with my gear. En route out, I messaged Cassidy. Meet at the dorm? Affirmative. I didn't twist to check pursuit. I swiped into the building, climbed straight up, and filled Cassidy in on the build-up. Voicing it aloud dialed down the paranoia vibe. The subsequent evening, I wrapped my off-campus cafe shift around 9 and shortcutted the lot by my dorm. There sat a Navy Ford, idling curbside, aimed at our entryway. The car's headlights were dark, yet there was clearly someone behind the wheel. Drawing nearer, I spotted that it was a vehicle I'd seen around campus before. Then his silhouette came into focus. Austin wasn't scrolling on his phone for food or chatting with anyone. He was simply fixed on the entrance to the dorms. I fixed my gaze forward, acting like I hadn't noticed, and veered off toward the side trail that went to the rear entrance. I swiped my badge to get in that way. My fingers trembled slightly against the reader. Climbing the steps, it hit me. This was the breaking point. Having a fellow student linger outside my residence hall in the dark was a boundary I could no longer brush off. Come morning, I shot an email to my academic advisor, Dean Richardson, requesting a private chat. In her office, I spilled the whole story. The assigned seats, the coffee run-ins, the odd overlaps, the persistent ride offers he ignored my refusals for, Taylor's offhand remark, the library encounters, and now the vehicle parked out front. She paid close attention, jotted down details, and probed with pointed queries. She assured me the school treated such behavior with gravity and that she'd summon Austin for a discussion. A few days on, she updated me. They'd spoken. He rejected any notion of stalking, claiming he was merely sociable and perhaps I'd gotten the wrong idea. She explained she'd issued him an official caution, reviewed the anti-harassment guidelines, and forbidden him from reaching out or coming near me beyond required academic interactions. For a short while, he kept his distance. He shifted to the far end of the classroom and only addressed me via team assignments, if at all. I could finally exhale. But soon the digital barrage began. It kicked off with a sprawling Facebook message expressing his deep offense, insisting he'd been caught off guard and yearned to set the record straight. Ignoring it, he switched to Instagram, then a fresh profile pleading that I was misjudging him and he only sought friendship. I stayed silent throughout. I captured screenshots of it all, shared them with Cassidy, and blocked him on every platform I could imagine. A peaceful stretch followed. One afternoon, Cassidy and I exited the design facility, debating a collaborative assignment as we headed to the library's bus halt. The route curved behind the structure. I recall the sudden rhythm of additional steps syncing up behind us, deliberate and unhurried, and a quick peek over my shoulder revealed Austin emerging from the library's shadow, trailing us at roughly 20 feet. Cassidy wouldn't let it pass. She spun around, locked eyes with him, and projected her voice so passers-by could hear. "Austin, why are you tailing us?" He halted, paused as if calculating his next move, then spun on his heel and headed to the lot without a word. That confrontation ought to have eased my mind, but it only amplified the dread. From then on, the unease escalated from unsettling to suffocating. I mapped out every campus trek to evade him. Spotting his car in a parking area, I'd opt for another. Catching sight of him in a corridor, I'd double back. I'd scan mirrors and panes for tails. I'd rope in buddies to accompany me even briefly. The fear seeped into my routine. Disrupted rest, scattered focus, hesitant replies in lectures. Deadlines slipped. Minor directions escaped me. I'd loop through messages, my thoughts hijacked by worries like, quote, 14. The stress peaked with migraines and gut aches ahead of specific lectures. Roughly a month post my session with Dean Richardson, I conceded that the situation wasn't getting better, and passively hoping he'd lose interest wasn't viable. I headed to campus security, squeezed into their tight quarters, and recounted it all, from the initial lift proposition to the recent shadowing. They requested a written account, specifics on timelines, evidence shots, and witness names from peers who'd observed him. The staff noted they'd pass it along to local authorities given his off-site address, and affirmed that his actions qualified as stalking. That term, uttered by an authority figure, landed with greater force than when a pal had voiced it. Days later, word came that he'd received an official no-contact order for stalking, with further incidents risking legal action. Even so, I glimpsed him on grounds a handful of times afterward, but he maintained a wide berth and never attempted conversation. Gradually, his regular spot in class sat vacant. By term's close, he'd vanished entirely. Whispers circulated that he'd been ousted for violating conduct rules despite the alert. No formal announcement, just campus buzz. I scraped through my courses and wrapped up the term, yet the unrelenting strain had eroded my spirit, turning the school into anything but a haven for studies. As registration for the following year loomed, staring at the paperwork, I knew enduring 3 more couldn't happen. Despite the hassle of higher costs, extra debt, and fresh faces, I sought admission to a school in the adjacent community. The upheaval was taxing, but remaining amid those memories seemed far grimmer. After that year, I walked away and never returned. 3 years on, I realized just how dangerously it might have spiraled if I'd continued forcing politeness. He never laid a hand on me or raised his voice. Yet the relentless surveillance, invasive inquiries, and the vehicle parked near my dormitory screamed obsession, far from any innocent curiosity. I often wonder about other women who might have faced his tactics, and I hope the filed report, the alert, and any notations in his file prevented him from going further. That ordeal showed me to heed my gut feelings, establish firm limits, secure my online profiles, and come to terms with the fact that the sudden jolt I get near dark blue Fords and that persistent sense of being observed may linger forever. The metallic drag above my bed is what pulled me out of my headphones. I froze for a moment, eyes fixed on my laptop display, dismissing it as the structure shifting. Then it repeated, deliberate and irregular, as if metal was being scraped inside a conduit. That's when his low voice became unmistakable for the first time, murmuring the same phrase endlessly from within the duct. This happened 2 nights back, following my overnight shift at the 24-hour supermarket where I handle cashier duties. I lease a compact studio on the 3rd floor of a weathered brick structure in the city center. 1 space, minuscule bath, mattress wedged beneath the sole overhead vent. I arrived home near 11:47, slipped off my footwear, fired up my laptop to tackle job-related emails as per my routine. The edifice hung in that dense silence, typical of late weekday evenings. I slipped into music through my earbuds while replying to notes from my supervisor. Despite cranking the sound, a faint undertone persisted below it all, reminiscent of a television droning from nearby quarters. Initially, I chalked it up to the guy above me chatting on his cell or viewing a film with his pane ajar. I'd never picked up noises through the levels before, but it seemed the logical explanation. The murmur held steady. No breaks, no shifts in inflection, merely a monotonous flow of words beyond my grasp. Now and then, I'd halt the tune and hold perfectly still. The voice endured. Identical pitch, identical pace. I even stepped to the pane, slid it open to scan the avenue below. Outside, faint traffic hummed and a distant shout echoed blocks away, yet the man's timbre didn't amplify. If possible, it sharpened as I retreated to the room's core. I reasoned with myself. Fine, someone's got their set running. None of my concern. I'm typically the complainer about racket, so I made myself drop it. Roughly 40 minutes ticked by that way. I wrapped up the correspondence, shut down the device, headed to the lavatory to splash water on my face, acting as if all was routine. Emerging, I flicked off the main fixture, kept only the table light glowing, and slipped under the covers. I cued a true crime audio series in my earbuds, more from custom than intent, and settled on my side toward the partition. Then the abrasion resumed. Now it rang right overhead, intense enough to rattle the bed frame, steel grinding on steel, precisely atop me. I stopped the episode, yanked off the buds, and gawked at the plaster above. The voice had intensified. It wasn't dialogue, just that single phrase, precise cadence, looping endlessly. The vent cover looms directly over my headboard, an aged rectangular slab of metal, coating peeling away. Tuning in, it dawned on me the noise wasn't filtering from beyond the ceiling. It descended directly via that opening, echoing from the duct itself. My pulse hammered fiercely, surging into my neck. Here's the kicker. This place's main air system has been defunct for ages. Tenants rely on personal window coolers and portable warmers. The property owner stressed it explicitly on the tour. Vents are inactive, no need to fuss. The channels lead straight upward to the loft and terminate. So there's zero justification for a man's words resonating through one. That realization parched my throat. I snatched my cell from the bedside table instinctively, without a clear intent. Briefly, I pondered resuming the audio at full blast and tuning out the whole mess. But the scrape resumed, nearer, and it struck me that dismissing a real intruder would be disastrous. I pivoted my legs to the floor and rose. Activating the phone's light, I aimed it at the grill. The voice droned on. Identical line, identical delivery. The wording eluded me still, but the rhythm etched into my mind. I wavered, debating a call for help versus investigating. In the end, intrigue and the urge to identify the threat prevailed. I moved to the galley area, fetched a stool, and hauled it beneath the vent, careful not to position myself squarely below. I stepped onto the chair with caution, pressing one hand against the wall for balance, while raising my phone with the other to aim it at the vent. In the dim glow up close, I could finally spot the screws, or more precisely, the spots where they were supposed to be. The pair at the top had vanished, leaving bare holes and subtle marks in the paint from their former positions. Only the lower ones were holding the cover in place, preventing it from dropping loose. It dawned on me that somebody had removed those upper screws from within the duct itself. A chill swept over me entirely. For a moment, my legs felt like they might buckle, sending me tumbling from the chair. Without intending to, I leaned in nearer, as if straining to catch the words more clearly. That's when the voice abruptly halted in the middle of a phrase. The abrupt quiet weighed even more oppressively than the earlier scratches. I found myself holding my breath unwittingly. Amid that stillness, I picked up labored breaths and the soft shift of fabric very nearby, mere inches beyond the cover. I didn't pause to think. I simply leaped down from the chair so quickly that it toppled and clattered behind me. I dashed to the entrance, snatched the baseball bat I stashed there due to the string of break-ins in the complex, and whirled around to face the duct again. My grip trembled violently, causing the bat to slide in my sweaty palm. Yet the notion of exposing my back to whatever lurked there terrified me far more than approaching it. I advanced beneath it and swung the bat forcefully into the wall directly under the vent. Underscore, quote underscore, 17 underscore, I bellowed, my volume exceeding what I'd planned. The impact echoed sharply across the space. At first, there was just that intense breathing echoing from the duct. Then a deep chuckle sounded immediately overhead, as though right against the grating. The voice followed, steady and distinct now, as if he'd abandoned any pretense. Recognizing my full name and unit number emerging from that shadowy opening, hit me like a shockwave. This wasn't some random encounter. He was fully aware of my identity, my address, my comings and goings. The cold returned in full force. The bat grew slippery in my grasp. Any pretense of bravery evaporated. I pivoted and fled. I wrenched the door open with such force that it slammed into the stop, and I didn't even pause to shut it. Gripping the bat tightly, I pounded on the closest doors with my knuckles. Quote, 19. I cried repeatedly, my voice breaking. For several moments, silence reigned. All I could picture was the cover falling free and a figure leaping down into my space. Then the door to 3C swung open, revealing my older neighbor, Mrs. K, wrapped in her bathrobe. Her gaze shifted from my expression to the bat, and then to my ajar entrance. Quote 20, she inquired. Breathlessly, I explained. A guy was crawling through the ducts. He mentioned my name. He uttered, quote 21. Without questioning or dismissing it as my imagination, she retreated briefly, retrieved her cell, and phoned emergency services. As I lingered in the corridor, quivering, A few more doors creaked ajar. Residents glanced out, murmuring among themselves. But none ventured toward my unit. I edged down by the stairs, flattening myself against the wall while fixing my stare on my exposed threshold. I was convinced any instant now a silhouette would emerge. It never did. The wait for the authorities dragged on interminably. But I wouldn't re-enter that space by myself. Upon their arrival, a pair of cops headed directly to the attic entryway down the hall, while the third remained to question the group. He noted my details and requested a precise recounting of the sounds. I kept circling back to it. He was aware of my routine. He knew my routine. Eventually, the initial officers descended. They reported the attic panel had been pried loose, with new tracks in the grime trailing to the rooftop escape hatch. The intruder had escaped already. They confirmed a deliberate breach into the air system via the ceiling space, allowing surveillance into units below through the openings. One cop mentioned the perpetrator likely observed for a time to memorize residents' habits. They advised updating the locks, adding surveillance devices, and avoiding overnight stays solo until management fortified the property. No one minimized it or labeled it a joke. That evening, once they deemed my space safe, I re-entered alongside Mrs. K at the threshold and hastily packed garments into suitcases. I collected my computer, paperwork, essentials, and whatever else seemed vital. I avoided positioning myself beneath the duct once more. Leaving the overhead light blazing, I secured the lock and headed to a buddy's place on the other side of the city. I stayed away for 7 days. Upon returning, I enlisted a team of handymen through my friend's sibling and insisted the owner approve the work. They inspected my apartment thoroughly, covering each vent with sturdy steel sheets fastened by robust bolts. They extended the fixes to several neighboring units on the level. Throughout the entire process of them boring holes and securing the fixtures, I found myself repeatedly glancing up at the overhead panels, imagining him sprawled out just beyond that flimsy barrier, eavesdropping on every sound. Yet the truly disturbing aspect wasn't merely the fact that another person had invaded the ductwork itself. I get it. There are those obsessive types who'd brave grime and insulation just for a peek at others. What struck me hardest afterward was the dawning awareness that he'd likely lurked there for several weeks, perhaps even months, tuning into my conversations on the phone, memorizing my overnight work schedule, noting the times I took showers, dozed off, or left the entrance ajar for a brief moment. In retrospect, it tainted every ordinary evening I'd passed in that space. Back at the police station to deliver a complete account, one of the detectives offhandedly noted that 3 other residents in the building had filed comparable complaints over the past month. Noises of scratching from the air ducts, a male voice murmuring, intimate knowledge about their routines that an outsider couldn't possibly have. Nobody had glimpsed his features. No arrests had been made. They assured me investigations were underway, though it came across as if they lacked any real leads. I vacated the premises 2 months afterward, the moment I could gather enough for a security deposit and line up a tolerable alternative. My current spot is more compact and situated in a rougher neighborhood, but the climate control operates differently, with no overhead ducts, only a mounted wall heater. Friends keep insisting I'm better off here, and logically, they're spot on. Still, in this fresh digs, whether I'm crashing at a pal's or checking into a motel, the sight of a vent cover positioned over the mattress ensures I can't drift off beneath it. I settled into a leased unit on the 4th level of a modest apartment block in early April of last year. Fresh off a bump up to logistics supervisor, I figured it was high time to go solo, ditching shared living for good. It symbolized my genuine step into maturity rather than mere play acting. That initial month dragged on pleasantly enough. I'd clock in at the office, whip up simple meals, binge series, and nod off with my computer still glowing as the structure creaked into quiet. Come early May, the odd occurrences kicked off. Initially, though, it seemed like harmless mischief. On a Monday dawn, I dashed to the garage juggling my mug and fob, only to spot a creased sheet tucked beneath my wiper blade. My gut twisted, assuming it was a citation for parking. Instead, unfolding it revealed tidy script reading, "You chose the right place." I dismissed it as a cheeky prank from an idle tenant nearby, crammed it into my satchel, and rushed away to handle shipments and data logs. Pausing briefly, I scanned the area. No other vehicles bore messages. The lot stood empty, with most shades drawn against the light. The phrasing might have passed for welcoming, yet it carried an unsettling edge. Ultimately, I balled it up and binned it near the entrance steps. Roughly 7 days on, after a shift, I rifled through my slot in the entrance hall and discovered a slim, ebony journal perched atop the standard clutter. I hadn't ordered stationery lately, and it arrived without wrapping or promo materials, just that unadorned binding wedged among the statements. Up in my kitchen, I flipped it open over a cup of tea. All sheets lay empty save the opening, inscribed with, "We watched to keep you safe." The penmanship matched the windshield message precisely. I fixed on those words. "We" implied a group. "Watched" suggested deliberate surveillance. A quiet chuckle escaped me as I chalked it up to an eccentric resident's quirky jest, but I pocketed the journal anyway, intending to share it. The following day, I queried the elderly fellow from the corridor about any loiterers by the boxes. He drew a blank and seemed puzzled. That afternoon, I presented it to the property overseer. He scowled, deemed it eerie, and proposed adding surveillance. I waved it off for the time being. Even voicing my concerns made me cringe at how suspicious I appeared. So, I forced a grin, brushed it aside, and pivoted to idle chat. Over the ensuing 3 weeks, silence reigned. No additional slips, no mysterious items, nothing disturbed indoors. I convinced myself this boded well, that the culprit had lost interest. My job ramped up with a fresh account, pulling my focus to routes and irate correspondence. Truthfully, I began thinking I'd blown it out of proportion. Then, toward late May, I returned home shortly past 7 and noticed a gleaming SUV idling opposite the main access. A lady in her 50s gripped the steering wheel, oversized shades concealing her eyes, gaze locked on the front entrance. I strode by casually, fumbling for my card until I buzzed inside. Reflected in the pane, her neck craned to track my progress. Dawn brought the vehicle back in the identical position, driver unchanged, lenses identical. Nerves knotted in my belly. I whipped out my cell, captured the license image, and messaged it to Lena along with if anything goes wrong. By midday, the SUV had vanished, only to reappear at dusk. This routine persisted across the next fortnight. Occasionally, I'd catch sight of her early in the day or late in the evening, always perched in the same spot, just observing. I began altering my habits, switching shops, taking alternate paths, hoping she'd disappear for good. But then she appeared at the supermarket close to my home, positioned next to a display rack, gazing over the rows of goods. Later, at some obscure filling station, she was pumping gas into her silver SUV, eyes locked on me. At that point, it was obvious this wasn't random chance. The day after the gas station encounter, I headed to the station and explained the whole situation to a weary-looking cop sitting opposite me. The message left on my vehicle, the journal, the metallic SUV, her constant appearances in unexpected spots around my area. He heard me out, entered a few details into his system, and ultimately shrugged it off. Nothing substantial to act on. No explicit warnings, no communications indicating harm, no evidence she'd entered my residence. He advised keeping records of incidents, maintaining a journal, snapping pictures, and only then, if she overstepped, like trailing me inside, attempting conversation, vandalizing my ride, might we consider a protection order. Heading back to my vehicle, I felt foolish for bothering. Yet I couldn't ignore the sense that they were downplaying it. She never came close, never uttered a sound, merely observed. That silent vigilance somehow unnerved me more than outright confrontation. I began noting every encounter, the date, hour, location, her actions. The entries piled up quickly, making it tougher to convince myself it was all imagined. I grew more vigilant about my patterns, adjusting my shifts at work whenever possible, opting for varied paths and markets to avoid predictability. For a stretch, it made no difference. I'd veer onto a quiet road and spot that familiar silver SUV idling at the far end. I'd exit the office after hours and notice it cruising by the parking area. Occasionally, I couldn't confirm it was her. Just a fleeting view that sent my gut churning. My buddies kept insisting I was overthinking it. She probably resides in the neighborhood, one suggested. Another added, now you're spotting her everywhere because you're searching. Part of me longed to accept that, but instinctively it clashed with the intensity of her focus. The evening that shifted their perspective happened at a cozy eatery, a short walk from my place. I'd chosen it on impulse, texted the details to our chat, and arrived directly from the job. Nothing went up on social media. Midway through our meal, Lena fell silent and fixed her gaze beyond me to the window. She tapped my shoulder and murmured, "Quote 28. I glanced around. The silver SUV was curbside, motor humming, the woman behind the wheel in dark glasses despite the fading light. She faced the diner directly, neither dining nor scrolling, simply stationed there, eyes on the pane. My other pal peered out, and I watched their expressions shift. No one called me overly suspicious afterward. Things intensified toward the close of June. After an extended session with a client, I returned home near 8 p.m. The corridor felt still. I turned the key as usual, nudged the door ajar, and halted at the threshold. Something in the air was off. A faint floral scent I'd never used. It lingered subtly but distinctly foreign, striking me immediately. I lingered motionless in the entry, ears straining. Moments later, a noise echoed from the bedroom along the brief corridor, the gentle pull of a bureau drawer, followed by its soft close. Without hesitation, I retreated, shutting the door firmly, pivoted, and hurried toward the staircase. Reaching the initial platform, I already had my phone in hand, dialing emergency services to report an intruder inside and that I wouldn't re-enter solo. The operator instructed me to remain outside in plain view until help arrived. Right after disconnecting, I rang my neighbor below, Mark, the ex-soldier who often offered assistance if needed. He picked up instantly, and upon hearing, quote, 29, I caught the scrape of furniture and his firm, quote, 30. He emerged into the stairs, gripping a worn baseball bat, and we lingered by the foyer until the squad car arrived. 2 deputies ascended with us, weapons ready. I waited in the passage as they breached my door, sweeping the sitting area and galley. One advanced to the sleeping quarters, bellowed for any occupant to show empty hands, and positioned himself so I could glimpse inside. There, on the bed's corner, sat the woman from the SUV, palms folded calmly, a compact purse next to her, as if she'd settled in to linger. She offered no resistance during cuffing, no outcry, no shock. She met my eyes briefly from the entry, as if verifying my presence. Then they escorted her by us. In the ensuing inspection, they rifled through my storage and wardrobes, discovering in one coat's lining a duplicate key to my flat that I hadn't authorized. Later, when the police spoke with the building superintendent, he admitted she'd talked him into handing over a spare key by claiming she was my family and that I'd gotten trapped at my job without access. He went on and on with his regrets, insisting she came across as composed and trustworthy, convinced he was doing a good deed. Yet that didn't erase the reality of her invading my apartment. God only knows how often prior to that evening. The detectives later shared that in questioning, she remained composed, courteous, and utterly locked into a single delusion. She repeated endlessly, "Our observer group must protect the chosen ones," and wouldn't elaborate on its significance or mention any other members. The psych assessment deemed her mentally fit, though gripped by fixations. It hardly eased my fears. At trial, she drew probation, plus required therapy, instead of prison time. I relocated at the first opportunity, changing complexes and districts entirely. Even now, more than a year later, I double-check the door viewer before unlocking it. I glance behind me on the way to my vehicle. I inspect the rear seat prior to sliding in. I never learned whether this so-called observer group was real or merely the deranged invention of a solitary mind. And whenever I spot an unknown vehicle lingering too long by my fresh residence, my pulse quickens as if that identical silver SUV is about to reappear. Last summer, my big sister Caitlin suffered a bad anxiety episode during her shift. And her ex-colleague Brian ferried her to an emergency center right in the heart of Seattle. The incident rattled the staff so much that physicians held her for monitoring through the night at this odd facility spread across several levels of a dual skyscraper business hub, an aging structure paired with a modern glass one linked by a walkway on the 3rd story. About 10 p.m. she rang me up, requesting some fresh attire and her device cord. Her tone was faint and trembling as she expressed sorry for dragging me into the city that hour. I assured her it was no trouble, collected the items from her place, linked up with Brian at the entrance, and he suggested tagging along because he claimed superior familiarity with the setup. The medical spot was housed in the vintage building, but upon arrival the street out front was clogged with vehicles and attendants for an adjacent gathering, leaving 0 spots for legal parking. Following a sluggish circuit around the area, Brian grumbled that it was ridiculous. He proposed we stash the car in the rear lot of the contemporary tower and traverse the linking overpass. I consented, given Caitlin's persistent messages inquiring about our progress. The newer tower's entrance was nearly deserted, featuring just a guard station and a handful of folks awaiting lifts. Brian explained we merely needed to ascend to the 3rd tier, pass over the bridge to the Elder Tower, then descend a single level to reach the care unit. In theory, it seemed straightforward enough that we even kidded about the quick turnaround. But the instant we emerged on that floor, everything mismatched his recollections. No clear indicators for the overpass, just neutral corridors lined with unfamiliar business plaques. We wandered in a loop, lost our bearings right away, and wound up near the lifts once more. Swallowing our egos, we approached the front desk, where the uninterested watchman scarcely looked our way before directing us along a passage, instructing a left turn past the next set of elevators and to track the subtle bridge markers. 5 minutes on, we faced a secured meeting room with 0 trace of the passage. Brian chuckled quietly, vowing he'd truly been employed there before, though not amid such a labyrinth. A custodian rolled past with a large wagon, headphones plugged in. Brian waved him over. The man removed one bud, heard us out, then gestured nearly the reverse way, advising to proceed forward, veer right, and seek a portal labeled connector. We pursued that lead as well, only to arrive in yet another bland passage that rang no bells. At that point, Caitlin was firing off puzzled pings, and my tolerance was fraying. Truth be told, we're both hopeless at navigating vast structures. So when we stumbled on a cargo lift concealed after a utility entrance, featuring aged wire grating rather than a full barrier, Brian gave a casual lift of his shoulders and noted, Quote 32. The controls indicated a halt at the bridge floor, yet as it clanked upward and the panels parted, we discovered ourselves at the remote edge of a hall we'd already passed. Identical artwork on the partitions, same escape marker. We ditched that option and sampled a standard elevator nearer the core of the level, hazarding pushes for the presumed towers, and alighted on another misguided story with shadowed panes and hushed, shuttered workspaces. No treatment area in view. That control board offered solely the sub-level or level 5. Brian figured the lower one likely held utility spaces demanding badge entry. He pressed the 5th floor button and suggested we'd simply navigate our way back over. The doors revealed a lengthy corridor with the primary lights extinguished, leaving only the faint emergency strips glowing along the baseboards and sections of the flooring shrouded in plastic sheeting as if a renovation had begun but been abruptly abandoned. The place appeared deserted, so we ventured ahead until we spotted a second set of elevators, exchanged weary glances, and attempted once more to descend to what we assumed was the bridge deck. But we arrived on yet another misplaced level, facing a control panel that presented just two choices: the basement or the seventh floor. After a brief pause, Brian muttered from his side, "The basement's sure to be secured. Let's go with 7. This time, as the doors parted, we entered a stark white passageway that obviously hadn't hosted daily activity in ages. Dusty office dividers leaned against one side, forgotten chairs scattered about, a simple door to the stairs, and at the distant end, a set of unlabeled double doors. The instant my shoe touched the ground there, unease washed over me. Not outright fear, but the nagging sense that we'd stumbled into a neglected corner of the structure where intruders weren't welcome. Then it hit me. We weren't by ourselves. Midway down, beside a tilted desk, a man and woman in slightly dated business attire stood frozen, reminiscent of figures from a vintage corporate snapshot. The man, perhaps in his mid-40s, hunched over a clutter of papers on the desk in his wrinkled shirt and trousers, while the woman, similarly aged, lingered next to him in a skirt that fell to her knees, her arms dangling limply as she gazed blankly at the opposite wall, disregarding our arrival entirely. Brian hesitated, and so did I. We both paused, expecting them to look up or acknowledge the elevator's chime. Yet the man stayed focused on his documents. The woman continued staring beyond us, oblivious to our intrusion. Brian decided aloud that we ought to locate an actual staff member and proceeded toward the hallway's far extremity, acting as if the pair didn't exist. I lingered, torn. I hated the idea of remaining solo near the lift, but advancing further into that eerie space felt equally wrong. I nearly shouted for him to return, when partway along, one of the office entrances creaked open just wide enough for a figure to emerge. Out came a woman dressed in a security outfit, though its hues and emblem differed entirely from those of the downstairs personnel. Her eyes locked onto us immediately, her voice cutting through crisp and emotionless. "You're not authorized for this floor." "Brian, over here!" I yelled, intending for him to retreat to the elevator. But he was already approaching her, palms slightly raised in a placating gesture, aiming to seem non-threatening. He launched into an explanation. We were disoriented, seeking the clinic in the vintage tower where my sister was admitted. She interrupted before he could wrap up, her delivery still monotone. "The topmost button," she indicated with a curt tilt of her head, back at the elevator, then vanished through the door, sealing it with a resounding click that echoed unnaturally in the vacant space. Brian returned, brow furrowed, inquiring if I'd caught the firm's name on her identification. I shook my head, noting only that her garb didn't align with the rest. He dismissed it with a shoulder lift, theorizing that various subcontractors might manage security per level, and since prior attempts had all failed, we should heed her advice. We re-entered the car and scanned the controls. The uppermost option was indeed 7. Brian selected it. The panels closed, and moments later they unveiled a fresh iteration of the 7th floor, one that couldn't have contrasted more sharply. Vibrant illumination, spotless rugs, offices with transparent fronts, wall-mounted guides in crisp print, distant phone chatter, and the hum of operating copiers. It resembled a standard workday hub, which only amplified the oppressive silence of the prior corridor in my mind. As we puzzled over the directory, a different security officer strode directly our way, clad in the familiar uniform of the lobby attendant, no warmth in her expression. "What business do you have up here?" she demanded, her words more command than query. We hadn't fully responded when she eyed the elevator we'd exited and declared, "This zone is off limits for administrative purposes. You're required to vacate right now." Brian interjected swiftly, recounting our quest to reach my sister's clinic, the repeated wrong turns, and the misleading guidance from others. I affirmed with a nod and fished out the visitor pass from below, offering it as evidence of our legitimate intent. Her irritation softened to mere exhaustion, and she probed how we'd access that lift sans proper credentials. Brian referenced the earlier officer, the one in the mismatched attire who directed us to the highest selection. The guard's features tightened in confusion, and she revealed that Outfit's provider hadn't overseen building protection in years. She appeared ready to debate the issue with us, but then apparently figured it wasn't worth the effort. With a simple sigh, she instructed us to tag along, swiped her card to unlock an unlabeled maintenance door at the hallway's far end. Beyond it lay a brief corridor and a basic service lift. She explained it would carry us to the public clinic floor, joined us for the descent, and escorted us into a bustling passage marked with directions to labs, imaging areas, and eventually urgent care. She didn't depart for her station until she confirmed we had a direct view of the clinic's doorway. By the moment we arrived in Caitlin's room and passed along her garments and charger, I'd pushed the odd diversion to the back of my thoughts to avoid blurting out anything that might heighten her anxiety. Several months on, during Caitlin's daytime follow-up visit to the same facility, I accompanied her once more. As we sat awaiting the nurse, I shared the full account. The pair in the corridor, the peculiar security officer, everything. The nurse initially chuckled and remarked, quote, 38. Upon seeing our seriousness, her expression shifted. She posed a few rapid inquiries, then revealed that 4 years prior, a blaze had ravaged the 5th floor of the former tower's accounting office. 2 staff members perished in the incident. Following that, the whole area was shut down for renovations, but the firm declared bankruptcy. The repairs barely commenced, and to her knowledge, the floor remained barricaded and scrubbed from standard entry protocols. Learning this unsettled me far beyond what I'd anticipated. The duo we'd spotted in that passage resembled ordinary folks very much alive, merely absorbed in their tasks and oblivious to our presence. Their attire was somewhat dated, though not outrageously so. Brian insists he overlooked them entirely until I mentioned it on the drive afterward. The nurse stressed repeatedly that the blaze-affected level is formally off-limits, with no one authorized to access it. I'm still puzzled about how we accessed it, or if we truly did. These days, any trip to that office building leaves me with a sinking sensation in my gut, and I take pains to never venture there solo. A lady handed me $3,000 in cash for permission to claim my spouse. This unfolded about a month back in the supermarket parking area where I serve as overnight security, and it lingers in my thoughts relentlessly. My wife Emily would frequently collect me post-shift near 7 a.m. She invariably appeared worn out, hair tied back in a ponytail, bare-faced, oversized hoodie draped over her scrubs. Folks often confused us for siblings since she's 23, yet seems more youthful, while I'm 25, but appear more mature. We'd tied the knot just 6 months prior, still bickering over household chores, bills, and how my nocturnal gig was disrupting our routine. But let's rewind to the origins, as the offer of funds wasn't the starting point. I'd been handling night duties at this round-the-clock grocery for nearly a year. The role drags on tediously until it abruptly doesn't. Much of my time involves monitoring feeds, patrolling shelves, shooing inebriated men away from napping amid the frozen section. Yet certain incidents cling to memory. Vehicles prowling the lot at an unhurried pace, figures lurking beyond the glow of the lamps, eyeing solitary walkers. Protection falls under my purview, but the pay doesn't inspire confidence about my wife idling in the shadows for me. She began these pickups after my previous vehicle expired permanently, opting to share a single ride temporarily. She'd endure a complete shift at the dental office, attend her twice-weekly night courses, then rise before dawn to fetch me. It wasn't perfect, but local transit at that time sucks, and she disliked me trudging home in a daze. I urged her to summon a cab, but she insisted it felt more secure to reunite during that eerie pre-dawn stretch. That particular dawn felt routine. Roughly 6:50, I completed my final patrol, verified the rear entrances, noted the log. My mind hovered in that hazy zone, alert yet with ideas meandering off course. At 6:59, my cell vibrated. The entryway feed showed Emily's compact vehicle easing into her usual slot, close to the automatic doors beneath the brightest fixture. She chose it deliberately, avoiding the shadowed edges further away. I punched out precisely at 7 o'clock and made for the exit. Mind already on the hot rinse and budget breakfast awaiting us. Peering through the panes, I spotted Emily pressing her brow to the wheel briefly before sitting up as I approached. I shifted the trolley barrier, emerged into the crisp air, and strode to the vehicle. That's when an elderly lady peeled away from the wall by the doors and advanced our way, right as my hand grasped the side door handle. I overlooked her presence on the security feeds, which irked me just a bit. She resembled a typical aunt, around 50 years old, dressed in everyday attire with tidy hair and a canvas tote slung over her arm. Her smile carried a hint of apology, as if she hated imposing. Quote, 39, she uttered, halting a short distance from Emily's side of the car. Would you mind driving me to the bus station? They've rerouted the service and I'm still getting the hang of it. Her tone was courteous and steady. I parted my lips to explain our rush. We often were, since Emily cherished every additional moment of rest. Yet the lady's gaze bypassed me entirely, fixing intently on Emily. She swiftly assessed her. Features, hands, the bundle of work uniforms in the rear seat, as though ticking off items on an invisible checklist. Quote 41, she remarked softly. Quote 42. Emily's brow furrowed slightly. Yeah, it is, she replied. No ID badge visible, no study materials around. The stranger's insight hit too close to home. The woman inclined her head, satisfied. Quote 44, she inquired. Quote 45. Briefly, I assumed she was proposing a domestic role, perhaps confusing Emily for a personal aide. It wasn't uncommon. Emily's youthful, reserved demeanor invited misconceptions. I let out a weary chuckle. _quote_46_ I clarified. The woman paid me no heed. She edged nearer, prompting me to instinctively position myself as a barrier between her and the ajar door. Her posture held no overt menace, but her fixation on Emily unsettled me, as if she'd already formed a preconceived notion. Then she retrieved her billfold. With composed ease amid the lot, she unfurled it and began extracting cash. "500 weekly for housework and meals," she stated, gaze unwavering on Emily. "My home is spacious. You'd have your private quarters." Emily offered a puzzled smirk and declined with a shake. "I already work elsewhere," she said, "and have my own housing." "1,000 per week," the woman countered without pause, as if the figure was prepped. She thickened the bundle in her grasp and raised it near Emily's view, yet not invading her space. Quote, 52 shoppers streamed past behind us into the building. None spared a look. To outsiders, it might resemble settling alone. Emily reclined into her seat, creating separation from the money. Quote, 53, she asserted more resolutely. Quote, 5, 4. The woman's grin held steady, but her expression cooled. The lingering look wasn't fury, merely detached and appraising. Quote, 55, she added. Quote, 56. That's when I intervened completely, pressing my palm against Emily's door to prevent it swinging wider. Quote, 57, I declared. Quote, 58. The woman hesitated. I half expected indignation and retreat. Instead, her mouth curved further. Quote, 59, she observed. Quote, 60. Now, she turned to me outright. And that's when the unease truly intensified. 2,000 monthly, she proposed casually, as if negotiating routine employment. She'll reside with me. I'll instruct her in all required skills. Benefits for everyone. You'll gain independence and she'll seize a chance. Emily's hand found mine. I hadn't registered the motion. Her digits felt chilled and trembled. Her clasp intensified with each she from the woman, as though Emily were absent, the discussion arching above her. We're not keen, I stated, deliberately calm. Kindly back off the vehicle. The woman peered past me. Her focus remained on Emily. 3,000, she upped. Cash immediately. She elevated the wad prominently, impossible to dismiss. I noted its substantial heft now, not mere pretense. That sum equaled several months' rent, a dent in our loans, and relief from Emily's lingering premarital health expenses. My thoughts raced there unbidden. I resented knowing precisely how 3,000 could transform our lives. Emily murmured, "Can we leave now?" That pierced the haze. I disengaged my hand, ignited the ignition, and shifted into drive. As I maneuvered, the woman circled to the front and clamped onto Emily's window frame, anchoring as if entitled. Quote, 69, she urged. A sharper edge crept into her words, irritation surfacing. Quote, 70. Her knuckles blanched against the pane. Proximity revealed what disturbed me about her stare. Her features projected warmth and civility, but her eyes were riveted, as if beholding a private vision where we played mere roles. Quote, 71. I commanded, volume rising. She lingered for just another moment, as if checking to see if I'd actually pull away with the car. Finally, she lowered her hand, cast one final lingering glance at Emily, and retreated. "Just a door-to-door salesperson, nothing more," she remarked casually. But her voice didn't quite align with the words. "You'll reach out. I can tell you will." She crossed in front of our vehicle, just like she'd indicated, and slipped a simple white card beneath the windshield wiper. Afterward, she made her way to the distant edge of the parking area, presumably toward her own ride. I pulled out without glancing at the card. The drive home passed in total silence. Emily gazed fixedly forward, her arms folded tightly around her body, as though shrinking herself to avoid notice. Over the following 3 days, identical white cards appeared repeatedly under our wiper. Same flimsy stock, same format. No name attached, only a contact number and a suburban address. We never caught sight of the person placing them. I recall the initial one sitting on our kitchen counter atop a paper towel, because I refused to touch it directly. Following the second card, Emily ceased referring to her as that peculiar woman. Instead, she began peering out the window at the street prior to our outings. Whenever we arrived at a spot to park, she'd request that I reverse in, positioning the windshield against a barrier or hedge. It was logical, so I complied. I also began escorting her to work each morning, even on mornings after a grueling shift when exhaustion begged me to collapse. The thought of Emily venturing out solo, with that woman potentially seeking another target, kept sleep at bay without much effort. A week following that initial encounter, I was stationed at my security spot around 3 a.m. The shop was nearly deserted. I was glued to the monitors, fighting drowsiness, when she suddenly materialized on the feed, entering via the automatic doors with an empty shopping basket dangling from her elbow. My gut twisted. I observed as she bypassed the registers entirely, without selecting so much as one item. Her gaze swept the aisles briefly before fixing on the security station. She approached me directly. "Still no decision?" she inquired. In close proximity, her appearance was unchanged. The identical outfit, tidy hairstyle, and that calculated smile that never reached her eyes. "I'll bump the bid to 5,000. This marks the final offer. Then I'll seek out someone else." I rose to my feet, using the counter as a barrier between us. "You have to go," I stated firmly, maintaining composure. "You confronted my wife in the lot. You've been placing cards on our vehicle. That's stalking." She merely lifted her shoulders. "You're complicating this unnecessarily. 5,000 on a steady basis, secure environment. Do you realize how many young women would jump at the chance?" I activated the intercom and summoned the manager, informing him of her return and that I needed her banned from the premises. As I spoke, she simply observed my expression, as if cataloging each syllable. My supervisor emerged from the back office, adjusting his shirt on the fly, and I recounted the situation once more in her presence. He paid attention, then addressed her. "Quote 73, he directed. Quote 74. She offered no resistance. She placed the basket aside, pivoted, and headed for the exit. Just as the doors parted, she turned back toward me. Quote 75, she remarked. Quote 76. That was the last we've encountered her. Yet Emily continues to avoid that section of the grocery store's lot. And to this day, while manning that security post and scanning the surveillance feeds, I find myself scrutinizing every solitary middle-aged woman who enters, alert for any who appraise others the way she did my wife, as if a dollar amount defined their worth. Back when I was 24, I was leasing a cramped studio apartment in Austin for $1,200 monthly, a steep price given my earnings from barista gigs. I toiled at a local cafe, and each rent due date left my account perilously low, stirring real anxiety. Relocating to my folks' house seemed like admitting defeat. Instead, I opted to seek a roommate. I advertised for a female housemate on an online platform, specifying my pre-dawn work hours, aversion to parties, and preference for a low-key tenant. Responses mostly came from men disregarding the gender stipulation or folks who reeked of chaos from the start. Then came Mia. At 22, freshly relocated to Austin, employed in marketing, she described herself as subdued, tidy, and often homebound with work. Among the applicants, she struck me as the safest bet. I proposed meeting at a nearby cafe to my building. Face to face, she came across as unremarkable and composed, responding succinctly without rambling. She committed to $600 rent plus shared utilities, adherence to simple house guidelines, and we scheduled her arrival for the subsequent week. The opening month unfolded with uncanny ease. Mia arrived with merely 2 bags, positioned her computer on the modest window-side table, and essentially rooted herself in the space. By the time I departed for my 5 a.m. duties, she was up and about. Upon my return, she remained at her keyboard. She prepared her own meals, cleaned up promptly, avoided clutter, hosted no visitors, and kept noise to a minimum. In such tight quarters, the apartment retained an orderly calm. I recall mentioning to a colleague that my new roommate seemed almost ideal. During the second month, her inquiries intensified. Over meals, she'd probe about my typical departure and arrival times, commute duration, and if my boss ever altered my schedule. She then asked about my preferred coffee spot and whether I could access my phone often. Soon, she delved into my private matters, like if I was seeing someone, had overnight guests, or who my inner circle was. Her voice remained even and neutral, as if completing a form. I responded but stayed nonspecific, quipped that my romantic pursuits were dull, and convinced myself she was merely socially clumsy and eager to connect. One afternoon, my supervisor let me off ahead of schedule, so I returned home several hours sooner than usual. Upon entering, I detected sounds from the corridor, and my bedroom door swung open. Mia emerged and halted abruptly. Quote 77, she uttered. Quote 78. But there were just 2 doors, bathroom and hers, and no charger in hand. I inspected my belongings. Nothing seemed disturbed outright, and I hesitated to confront her. Instead, I said, quote 79, and attempted to dismiss it. Roughly a week on, I spotted my cosmetics rearranged and a pair of books on my shelf exchanged. No items gone, merely out of place. During one evening's meal prep, I casually inquired if she'd entered my space. Mia's brow furrowed. She denied it, insisted on respecting limits, and even volunteered to search with me. She appeared baffled, leaving me feeling foolish and overly suspicious for raising it. By the third month, the oddities felt far from trivial. One day I launched Instagram to find myself signed out. After resetting, my direct messages brimmed with unfamiliar exchanges. Pals messaged in confusion, suspecting a breach. I issued apologies and updated the password. That night, upon arriving home, Mia queried if I'd altered my login details, claiming she couldn't locate something online. I'd shared nothing about the incident. I fixed her with a gaze and demanded how she knew about my passwords. She hesitated, shrugged it off as a guess, and returned to her computer. Later, I fired up my own device, examined the browsing logs, and discovered entries for my email and Instagram from our network on work days when I was absent. That's when it hit me. Mia had been tracking my digital life from the start. The following morning, I bided my time until she shut her screen, then informed her I was aware of unauthorized access to my email and Instagram via our Wi-Fi during my shifts. I pointed out she was the sole other person present. She attempted to deflect, suggesting a possible external hack. I referenced the bizarre DMs and the occasion I'd caught her inside my room. As I persisted, tears welled up. She confessed to rifling through my possessions and profiles, explaining she yearned to understand me deeply and emulate my life. I stressed that behavior was unacceptable, a major breach of trust, and demanded she vacate. Her sobs ceased abruptly. She countered that our deal allowed a 6-month stay, payments were current, and she lacked alternatives. She warned I couldn't evict her legally over mere discomfort. Unwilling to tangle with courts and unclear on the regulations, I assured her I'd proceed correctly and headed to my job. On my subsequent free day, I consulted an attorney, presenting our chats and transaction records while detailing her actions. He explained early removal might require at least 2 months and solid evidence for any privacy invasion claim. Suddenly, I felt cornered, yet armed with a plan. That evening, I acquired a concealed camera, positioning it in my room toward the entrance on my desk. I mentioned to Mia that extra shifts meant longer absences, so she'd anticipate my unavailability. Over 3 days, I worked normally and reviewed footage after hours. On the third, it captured Mia entering my space, rifling through the wardrobe, donning my outfits, perching at my desk to peruse my journal while snapping pictures. She then extracted a file containing my financial docs and ID duplicate, photographing them as well. Come morning, I transferred the clip to a USB and visited the precinct. There, I recounted the saga to an officer and handed over the drive. He viewed segments confirming her activities, inquired about her residency length and any consent for room access, then assured they'd question her and advised crashing elsewhere if I sensed danger. Later, authorities stopped by the unit. That night, a detective phoned. Mia had owned up to the account intrusions and document handling, revealing she'd been mimicking my identity in an attempt to mirror me, tied to undisclosed mental health struggles. Backed by her statement and the recording, they assisted in securing a no-contact order mandating her departure within 7 days. She cleared out that week while I was on duty. Shortly after, unmarked parcels began arriving without sender info. I'd brought up a book I was interested in, a scarf matching my preferred shade. Each gift echoed something I'd casually mentioned to her. This pattern continued for 3 months. Then a police officer contacted me to report that Mia had been detained for breaching the restraining order and attacking another individual. I relocated to a fresh apartment and now reside solo, despite the steep rent. Folks advise me to vet potential roommates more carefully, but I'm unsure how to go about it. She came across as perfectly ordinary, and that's the part that truly unnerves me. In March 2021, I was let go from my hospital position due to funding reductions. As a result, I began working as a courier for a round-the-clock prescription delivery outfit. At age 31, it seemed like a step backward in my career, yet the compensation was solid, particularly for overnight shifts, where I had the flexibility to choose my schedule. I typically handled runs from 7 p.m. until 3 a.m., as that's when the high-priority requests flooded in, often with bonus gratuities. Orders for pain relievers, flu remedies, infant formula, or antibiotics for ill children, things like that. The job itself was uncomplicated. Collect from the all-night pharmacy. Log the package via the application. Head to the destination. Drop it at the entrance or deliver directly. Mark as finished. Do it again. During training, the firm drilled in several key guidelines. Don't tamper with the packages. Verify the recipient's name and birth date for personal handoffs. And if a location seems off, use the in-app messaging rather than taking matters into your own hands. That final rule resonated with me. I'd seen the chaos at the hospital when folks second-guessed medication details. I appreciated the routine. It fulfilled that organizational itch from my medical days without exposing me to patients crashing right before my eyes. Weekends ramped up the intensity. More intoxicated customers, sudden script needs, bigger earnings. I stashed pepper spray in the driver's side pocket, kept my phone secured with maps ready, and if vibes turned sour, I'd wait in the vehicle rather than chasing a meager $10 bonus into trouble. By the start of April, I'd been at it for roughly a month, and no major oddities had cropped up. Shady corridor walks, yeah. One dude offered weed as a tip. A distraught parent snatched up formula and nearly embraced me in relief. But it was all standard graveyard shift fare. Exhaustion set in. My back ached, but bills got covered. I reminded myself constantly that this was just a stopgap until I landed another hospital gig. On that early April Saturday evening near 11 p.m., an assignment popped up for insulin and needles. It wasn't unusual at first. We handled plenty of diabetic supplies. The address, however, gave me second thoughts. It sat in the city's eastern industrial zone, an area I'd never serviced before. Magnifying the map revealed only storage facilities, loading areas, and compact factories. No residences, no multi-unit dwellings, zero signs of actual habitation. What truly unsettled me was the pinpoint location. The coordinates locked onto an office structure. Not even a hybrid commercial spot, just a straightforward corporate hub amid desolate blocks. I reviewed the info twice, then tapped the messaging feature. "Hello, this is Lisa, your driver," I wrote. "Could you verify the drop-off?" My navigation shows it as a business site. The response arrived in seconds, as if they'd been anticipating it. "Affirmative, that's right. Stuck working overtime, unable to step out. Delivered to the 3rd level, Suite 12. A follow-up pinged immediately. Set the goods outside and phone upon arrival. No signature, no courtesy, zilch. The purchase was already covered up front, with a hefty tip tacked on, more than the typical pre-delivery amount. Plus, it involved insulin. Turning down a valid order over my unease about a workplace could spell disaster for someone in need. Cash was tight, and I hated the idea of being the barrier to a diabetic's treatment. Reluctantly, I confirmed and headed eastward. The urban sprawl faded as I progressed. Lamp posts grew sparse after initial clusters. Shop fronts morphed into gated yards and shadowed structures. Directions led me onto a quiet lane devoid of traffic. Arriving at the spot drove home the isolation. The edifice loomed pitch black, a possible 4- or 5-story affair, all panes shuttered, no janitorial glows, no lingering monitors, nada. The lot stood barren. My compact car was the sole occupant beneath a flickering lamp. I positioned it toward the outbound path instinctively and glanced at the clock. 11:40 p.m. An odd hour for overtime in a vacant structure on a weekend. Briefly, my finger lingered near the app's cancel option, but envisioning a figure inside, monitoring the tracker for their vital meds, kept me from bailing. I inched nearer to the entryway, switched off the motor to listen, and stepped out. The primary access featured glass panels and steel framing lined with a column of intercom buttons and faded directory strips. A faint emerald indicator lit the speaker. I located number 12, hit it, and waited, the thermal carrier dangling from my grip. All of a sudden, I realized my vehicle was the sole one visible in the area. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, making me wonder if anyone would respond at all. Finally, a male voice crackled over the speaker, a bit muffled yet composed. "Enter." The door's about to unlock. No pleasantries, no appreciation, just those words, followed by a sharp echoing clang from the mechanism. I paused, my thumb hovering over my smartphone, reminding myself that the application had already logged my position and the exact time, regardless. With that, I swung the door wide and entered the foyer. The interior was dim, lit only by faint emergency strips hugging the corridor walls and a glowing crimson exit light. The atmosphere felt musty, as if the place hadn't seen visitors in ages. The lift was blocked open by a safety cone, with an out-of-order notice stuck over the controls, leaving the staircase as my sole path upward. Adjusting the sack for a firmer hold, I shoved against the sturdy stair door. The passage was cramped, every step reverberating off the plain concrete and steel banisters. Clutching the package of insulin and needles, I ascended automatically, tallying the stairs in my mind while tuning into the sound of my breaths in the confined area. Reaching the landing on the second level, I came to a halt. The unease of the entire scenario crashed over me in that moment. Pausing there, I truly examined the contents for the first time, rather than viewing it as routine cargo. The tag indicated insulin bottles, yet the accompanying case held standard 5-milliliter throwaway syringes. Nothing specialized for insulin use. No one managing diabetes would request those. Having handled medications for years in clinical settings, I recognized the mismatch instantly. My instincts shifted from discomfort to outright warning bells. Fishing out my phone, I pulled up the delivery specifics again. The buyer's profile was a fresh setup from earlier that day. No prior transactions, no support comments, zilch. Only this substantial buy directed to a shadowy office in an industrial district nearing midnight. Instructions remained. Delivered to the third level, Suite 12. Deposit at the entrance and dial in. My palm grew clammy, gripping the device. All the safety protocols from training echoed loudly, urging me to avoid risky scenarios. Pivoting from the ascent, I descended swiftly, not sprinting, but hurrying, to the ground floor, across the entryway, and through the transparent exit. Each footfall weighed more until fresh air hit me once more. Once outside, I quickened to a near jog back to my ride. Slipping inside, I secured the locks and paused, gaze fixed on the dash, heart pounding amid the quiet parking expanse. Then I accessed the app and contacted support. The representative who picked up sounded weary but attentive. She requested the job ID, then inquired about the issue. I laid it out plainly. Mismatched syringe type. For the insulin, novel user account, odd warehouse-like spot, vacant structure in the dead of night, and a guy's voice on the buzzer directing me solo to the upper level. I admitted it didn't feel secure to proceed. After a brief hush, she assured me I'd made the wise choice in retreating. She explained she'd void the transaction, issue a refund, and log it as a hazard, ensuring I received my standard compensation. Hanging up, she urged submitting a formal report via the app to blacklist the site for upcoming runs. I agreed to do so once settled at home. As the line clicked off, I noticed my fingers trembling slightly. I compelled myself to remain seated and inhale deeply for a bit. Gazing at the edifice, a light flickered on in a third-story pane, not glaring, perhaps a desk lamp or monitor glow shifting as if a figure paced within. Moments later, it faded to black. That sealed it. I fired up the motor and exited the lot. The drive back kept me glancing in the rear view constantly. Roads were deserted, no tails in sight, yet I still chose a spot near my residence and hurried up to my unit. Over the following days, I avoided gigs in that factory district, opting for livelier urban zones. Roughly a week on, a colleague mentioned a request from there, got auto-rejected thanks to my alert. I remain clueless about the intent, illicit substances or some hoax. Grateful I skipped that top floor. No desire to find out. For 3 years, I've held a position dispatching for a firm that hauls construction materials. My typical hours run from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., stationed at a desk to map out hauler paths. That afternoon, near 3, just a trio of rigs were operational, and I was midway through reassuring a client for the third go-around that his batch of concrete slabs was running 20 minutes behind schedule. That's when the door swung in, and Rachel appeared. She's in charge of intake and dispatch paperwork at the depot, and she rarely interrupts during an ongoing discussion. She lingered in the doorway, gripping the frame with one hand, her expression pinched and intense as she fixed her gaze on me. I wrapped up the phone conversation quickly, assuring the client I'd confirmed the delivery time, then ended the call. Quote, 81, I inquired. Her refusal to take a seat already signaled trouble. Quote 82, she explained. Quote 83. He'd pulled into the rear lot and departed. I furrowed my brow and checked the monitor. The tracking software indicated Thomas was en route to his final destination. Wait, He should still be on Maple Street, I replied. I'd spoken with him barely 30 minutes earlier. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. I saw him drive into the parking area, climb out, slam the cab door shut, and head directly for the side exit. He bypassed the office entirely, skipping any paperwork, and abandoned the cargo area unsecured. That detail had me rising to my feet. Our drivers never leave bays exposed, especially not with the kind of loads we transport. Exposed in what way? I pressed. Partially ajar or fully raised, she clarified. The contents are visible from outside. She fidgeted with the clipboard clutched in her grasp. I held off on inspecting it myself until you were here. But this feels off, doesn't it? He normally sticks around until 4. She had a point. Thomas gripes endlessly over even a few minutes deducted from his log. Ditching early, unsecured vehicle, ignoring the dispatch radio, none of this resembled his usual routine. From my workstation, I keyed the radio to reach him. Only crackling silence responded. I refreshed the GPS display, noting the vehicle marker persisting on the map. Must be a delay in the updates, I grumbled. Regardless, we had to secure that truck. Any discrepancies in inventory would implicate us both. All right, I said. Let's investigate. We navigated through the storage facility and emerged via the rear exit into the company vehicle yard. Thomas's rig, the white Isuzu accented with a blue band, sat positioned at the perimeter near the barrier rather than in his standard spot. The back loading panel was elevated about halfway. From our vantage point, the interior appeared largely vacant. That's exactly how he abandoned it, Rachel murmured softly. He didn't spare it a backward glance. She gestured toward the pedestrian gate. He simply exited. I approached with her trailing close. At the rear, I slipped beneath the elevated door and hoisted myself into the hold. It stood nearly barren, raw metal walls, dangling restraint straps, and scattered bits of cardboard littering the base. No crates, no tubing, none of the items from the load list I'd prepared at dawn. That's when it caught my eye. Wedged forward against the partition was a lone shipping carton, roughly a meter square, precisely stacked. Devoid of any markings, scans, or branding, just plain craft paper, sealed with a fresh band of adhesive across the lid, its sheen suggesting recent application. The rest of the trailer showed signs of a full discharge. This solitary item disrupted the pattern. Rachel remained at the threshold. "Is that listed on his manifest?" she wondered. I denied it with a shake. Today was all palletized goods. I scanned it once more, half hoping details might materialize under scrutiny. Nothing. Could be a pickup item, Rachel ventured, though her tone lacked conviction. Returned goods invariably arrive with affixed documentation. This remained unmarked. "Maybe we should phone Thomas?" she suggested moments later. I descended from the trailer. It seemed the logical move. Before handling unfamiliar cargo, we required his explanation for abandoning it and vanishing. I retrieved my cell and punched in his contact. It trilled straight to voicemail. I disconnected and redialed. Identical outcome. No messages or alerts from him appeared. "He's ignoring the calls," I noted. Rachel folded her arms, her stare unwavering on the container. We paused there briefly, the pair of us amid the hushed yard, confronting this anomalous package in a prematurely returned exposed hauler. Abruptly, the box shifted. Just a subtle nudge from within, sufficient to nudge one edge against the forward bulkhead. Rachel drew a sharp inhale and retreated from the tail. My mouth turned parched. Briefly, I rationalized it as mundane, a forgotten implement, or perhaps a stray animal cornered during a stop. I kept those notions unspoken. We merely observed. A brief interval passed without incident, long enough for me to wonder if nerves had tricked us into overreacting, perhaps just a minor settling. Then it lurched sharply, accompanied by a muffled impact echoing from the interior. _quote _86 Rachel breathed. Edging further away. My initial urge was to position her safely and summon backup from inside. Yet before I could act, the ceiling strip atop the carton tautened and tore. One of the upper panels began lifting internally, the adhesive ripped free with a sharp crack, allowing the lid to swing upward. A gloved hand, clad in dark leather, emerged through the gap, groping the rim. A matching one followed. The panels spread apart as a figure extracted himself from the confines. He appeared gaunt, outfitted in dark coveralls and sturdy footwear, his features obscured by a black ski mask. He approached the task with the ease of someone experienced, placing one knee on the cardboard before planting both feet on the truck's metal surface. He made his way to the vehicle's edge, leaped onto the pavement, stood tall, and strode past us with purposeful, unhurried steps. He ignored us completely. The guy rose to his feet, dusted himself off, and moved toward the cargo area's rim. Rachel let out a brief, piercing yell, but I was speechless. Her cry didn't faze him in the slightest. He navigated the ripped flaps, bent low, and dropped to the asphalt below. He paused briefly, scanning the parking area, the warehouse entrances, and the office lights. Moments later, he hurried toward the warehouse entrance as if he had a precise destination in mind. Rachel reacted first, pulling out her cell phone and declaring, quote, 87. I couldn't stay put. My thoughts raced to the gate mechanisms and how the rear door remained ajar, with workers in the loading zones oblivious to this intruder who'd just emerged from a crate right behind them. I dashed toward the office entrance. In the background, I caught Rachel already speaking to the emergency operator, reciting our business name and location, explaining, quote, 88. By the moment I reached the surveillance display and activated the switch for the main gate, the feed showed him clearly. He paid no attention to the descending barrier. Instead, he veered directly to the side gate beside the perimeter fence. It remains unlatched during operating hours since drivers dislike dealing with locks. He shoved it aside and passed through without breaking stride. The final glimpse on the monitor was his retreating figure as he rounded the adjacent structure's corner. I lingered there momentarily, fingers still gripping the panel. Rachel's conversation faded as she re-entered, still connected to the operator, verifying that the individual had vacated our site. Once she ended the call, her face was ashen and her hands trembled slightly. She mentioned that patrol was en route and instructed us to remain indoors, avoid pursuit, and leave everything undisturbed. That suited me perfectly. I returned to my workstation and accessed the dispatch interface, fixating on Thomas's route as if some concealed message might reveal why a hooded figure had just exited his rig. Nothing of the sort appeared. Roughly 20 minutes afterward, a pair of officers entered via the main entrance. We guided them across the storage facility and into the yard. Thomas's vehicle sat awkwardly positioned near the boundary. The container remained up front in the hold, partially crumpled on one flank from his escape. An officer prodded the lid open using his pen's tip. Within lay only mangled cardboard and a fragment of shadowy cloth. "No one disturbed the contents?" he inquired. We assured him we hadn't. They jotted that detail, collected our identifications, and began individual accounts beside the vehicle's side as a third officer patrolled the fence perimeter. Our descriptions matched: slender frame, outfit fully black, including gloves and face covering, medium stature, ordinary gait, no markings or blemishes visible, nothing distinctive. I emphasized repeatedly that he hadn't glanced our way, and the officer simply acknowledged it as if it were a familiar refrain. When they inquired about surveillance, I sensed we finally had valuable intel. I described the yard feeds, those at the warehouse access points, and the interior corridor ones. They requested the recordings from earlier that day and the recent hour. Our supervisor emerged, conferred briefly with them, then escorted one back to the compact space housing the recording device. As they extracted segments, he at last contacted Thomas via his private line and directed him to report back at once. I remained at the reception with the remaining officer, fielding the inquiries with minor rephrasings, revisiting the timeline. The initial sighting of the truck, the discovery of the crate, and Thomas's arrival some 40 minutes after. Rather than entering via the yard as customary, he used the front and halted abruptly upon spotting the badges. He appeared a decade older in an instant. The officer suggested he join them in the lounge area. "I accompanied since I'm in dispatch, and that vehicle falls under my oversight." Thomas eyed me warily, as though gauging my awareness. He began by feigning ignorance, claiming no knowledge of the person's identity or the crate's contents, assuming it was mere surplus goods returning to base. After several probing questions, he relented. He massaged his brow and admitted, quote, 90. Thomas confessed that the fellow had assisted him in stowing the crate in the truck's rear before heading out on his initial delivery. There were no documents, no sign-offs, and zero records in our database. He convinced himself it was just a minor shortcut since the drop-off matched the standard company path and no one would suffer any harm. Later that afternoon, on his return trip, the same individual rang his phone. As Thomas described it, the directives were straightforward: position the vehicle, keep the rear door unlocked, exit as if it were business as usual, and a maintenance worker would handle the rest while slipping him cash afterward. Midway through Thomas's account, the officer from the surveillance booth entered carrying a USB drive and took a seat. He explained they possessed sharp video of the stranger near the perimeter barrier that morning, chatting with Thomas, followed by him lingering at the lot's edge, observing the truck's arrival, then emerging from the crate and slipping toward the exit. Additional street surveillance captured the same outfit and physique departing our area. The investigators outlined their theory of the scheme. The stowaway was meant to slip aboard undetected, remain concealed in the vehicle past shift end, then emerge within the secured compound to unlock the entrance or a lateral access for his accomplice. With the site deserted, they could ransack the pricier equipment and other valuables, vanishing before the crew arrived at dawn. Thanks to Thomas trimming his route slightly and Rachel spotting the oddly placed truck, the intruder had to exit prematurely and flee. Authorities copied the recordings, our testimonies, and Thomas's complete narrative. Over the following days, tension gripped the entire depot. Truckers grew extra vigilant about gate conversations, and the supervisor began securing the walkway entrance except during active use. Shortly after, he summoned me and Rachel to his office, revealing that investigators had linked the dark-clad figure to earlier incidents and identified his cohort via nearby surveillance. They apprehended the hooded one initially, then the gate approacher. Both were in custody soon enough. In my third year of college, I'd often bunk at my friend Ethan's after intense cram sessions. He shared this enormous antique Victorian home close to school with a couple of roommates. It dwarfed my tiny dorm room, resembling a labyrinth with its multiple levels, lofty rooms, elongated corridors, and expansive loft-turned junk space. Typically, I'd collapse on his sofa bed post-review and head to lectures fresh. That chilly October evening, I opted to stay since my exam was early the next day in his vicinity, sparing the trek to campus housing. His flatmates were away, one with relatives, the other at an out-of-town show, leaving just the two of us. We scattered study materials over the lounge table, chugged budget caffeine boosts, got takeout stir-fry, the routine. Come 10 p.m., we were vaguely tuned into a silly sitcom, while feigning productivity. Near 11, a sharp groan echoed from above, as if weight pressed a creaky plank right overhead. This wasn't the house's typical groans. It carried a deliberate thud, like a footfall. Ethan glanced minimally and dismissed it as the building's quirks, the plumbing and timbers shifting on their own. Yet I saw no breeze rattling windows, nor the furnace rumbling. The program droned on, but my ears strained toward the rafters over the dialogue. Silence returned, so we brushed it aside. I reasoned it was likely timber swelling or some such and refocused on my notes. Roughly 20 minutes on, it recurred. But now, it resembled a hefty object scraping over the loft planks, brief and grating before halting. I set aside my food and eyed Ethan. He wore a subtle crease of doubt, clearly registering it now. He silenced the screen, and we paused, gazing upward foolishly. A faint squeak came next from deeper in, suggesting a repositioning of mass. Ethan exhaled, admitting, "All right, that's odd." He noted they hadn't ventured to the loft in ages due to the awkward ascent, and nothing stored there could stir independently. He stayed calm, merely puzzled, which unsettled me similarly. At last, he suggested investigating to dispel any needless jitters. It wasn't bravado. We simply aimed to dismiss a critter intrusion or intruder. The loft access sat on the top level, down a slim passage, a retractable ladder with plank rungs. We ascended quietly, side by side, and Ethan tugged the release cord. The ladder extended with a sharp, rattling bang that startled me more than I'd like to confess. Ethan activated his phone's flashlight, and we ascended cautiously, him leading the way while I gripped the edges tightly just behind. The attic stretched out as a vast, incomplete area featuring bare rafters and a heavy coating of dust coating every surface. Scattered around were aged crates, damaged chairs and tables, a pair of bicycles with deflated wheels, and assorted clutter from past renters piled haphazardly. My socks gathered grime at every footfall. Ethan swung the beam in a gradual arc, scanning for any recent disturbances or anomalies. But nothing appeared shifted or unusual. No shattered pane, no clear signs of wildlife, no evidence of a lurker. The atmosphere hung heavy and musty, unmoving. We paused roughly at the center, ears straining, illuminated only by his device's glow and the subdued hum of the television filtering up from below. For a brief moment, silence reigned completely. I nearly quipped something about ghostly tales when the sound emerged. Breathing. Foreign to us. A soft yet unmistakable rhythm, irregular and deliberate, emanating from the distant edge, concealed by a stack of cartons against the rear partition. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and Ethan's fingers clenched around his phone. He directed the light over, and initially shadows dominated, mere boxes and a looming, twisted cabinet. Then, adjusting the angle, we spotted grimy sneakers protruding from beside the cabinet. The ankles were crossed, suggesting the person had been reclined in that spot. Ethan shouted a question about who might be present. Gradually, a shape rose from the cabinet's shadow. It was a young man, around 25, sporting a shaggy beard, ragged attire, and weary, frightened eyes that narrowed in the glare. He raised his hands to shoulder height, open-palmed, and began speaking rapidly. His tone wavered slightly as he insisted he sought no conflict, merely a spot to rest. From nearer, he didn't seem intoxicated or under the influence, just utterly drained yet jittery. His gaze darted from us to the ladder, weighing an escape. He revealed himself as an ex-student, evicted from the dorms 3 weeks prior over unpaid fees. Aware that the house cycled through student renters, he'd slipped inside one evening via an unsecured third-floor window and claimed the attic as his hideout, assuming it went unexplored. He blurted out the tale in a hurried stream, tripping on phrases as if reciting a rehearsed monologue. He admitted slipping downstairs after dark, once lights dimmed, to raid the refrigerator and restroom, listening for settling sounds before venturing out. He vowed he'd only pilfered snacks, nothing more from the place. He wasn't out to harm a soul. He'd simply exhausted his choices and craved shelter that was dry and peaceful. Throughout his plea, he maintained elevated hands pressed near the wall, bracing for an attack or shouts summoning authorities. His words trembled at times, and when Ethan adjusted his stance, the man recoiled visibly. No matter his circumstances, he radiated raw desperation and fear at being discovered. Ethan fixed him with a prolonged gaze, then glanced my way. I sensed his effort to stay composed, though his jaw clenched and he fidgeted with the phone, uncertain if it should dial help or serve as defense. I aimed not to overreact, but the notion that this intruder had lingered overhead during our slumbers, eavesdropping perhaps, or prowling when alone, unsettled me deeply. No matter his backstory, that reality crossed a line. I urged Ethan to alert the authorities, insisting we couldn't allow an unknown to squat up there indefinitely. I aimed for a level tone to de-escalate, yet remained direct. Quote 92. Hearing that, the man pleaded desperately, promising to vacate immediately, pack his belongings, and vanish for good. Ethan hesitated, gave a single nod, and retreated toward the ladder, beam steady on the figure. He conceded we had no alternative, so he dialed emergency services, activated the speaker, relayed our location while watching intently. The operator inquired about weapons or aggression. Ethan replied no, describing him as non-threatening but illicitly residing in the attic. Instructions followed. Descend to the living area, await below with the entrance unbolted, and steer clear of trapping him. I warned the man outright that officers were en route and urged restraint from folly. Surprisingly, he stayed put, slumping against the wall with a resigned bob of the head, as if anticipating this close. We descended as a group, Ethan ahead, the intruder sandwiched, me trailing. I maintained space for reaction if needed, but he made no move. We were gathered in the living room with the television silenced, listening as he shared additional details about his situation while we anticipated the authorities. He explained that his academic scholarship had vanished once his performance plummeted due to late-night shifts. Soon after, unpaid fees led to his expulsion from school. His family wouldn't offer support, insisting he'd chosen his path. Job hunts proved fruitless since he lacked a fixed residence, causing his circumstances to deteriorate rapidly. He'd crashed on friends' sofas initially, progressed to building staircases, and eventually recalled this place from a past gathering, figuring the attic beat sleeping rough outside. He repeatedly emphasized that scaring us was never his intention. He merely grabbed some snacks, used the facilities, and aimed to remain unseen. Part of me sympathized with his plight. Yet throughout his account, images haunted me of him, padding around overhead as we went about our evenings below, memorizing our habits under cover of night. That didn't erase the reality of his unauthorized entry and prolonged presence over weeks in secrecy. Ethan remained subdued, offering occasional nods while fixating on the carpet rather than the intruder. Roughly quarter of an hour passed before a rap at the door sounded, followed by two uniformed officers entering after identifying themselves. We rose and stepped aside, allowing them to handle the matter. They questioned him, verified his identification, posed a handful of inquiries to us, and informed him of his detention for unlawful entry. He accepted it without resistance. They secured him in restraints, escorted him to their vehicle, and one returned to note that with no stolen valuables or injuries reported, he'd likely be directed to social support rather than immediate incarceration. Once they departed with him, Ethan secured the entrance and released a long sigh, as if he'd been suppressing air for ages. Silence stretched between us for a spell. At last, he suggested we return upstairs to inspect the intruder's actual quarters, ensuring nothing further had been disturbed. Curiosity felt oddly inappropriate, but I concurred, driven by a need to confirm no hazards lurked. We extended the ladder once more and ascended into the attic anew, this round illuminating the space with our cell phone beams. Tucked in the distant angle amid crates and that dated bureau, his arrangement came into view. An aged bedroll rested atop compressed boxes, alongside a cluster of plastic water jugs aligned by the partition, discarded meal wrappers arranged tidily, and a cell phone charging via a functional socket overhead. Everything appeared methodically arranged, suggesting he'd intended an extended tenure. He'd crafted this compact hideaway in that obscured spot, undetectable unless one ventured deep and peered intentionally past the furniture. From our prior vantage, he would have stayed completely hidden. A few pads held jotted employment ads, a university layout, and a log of householders' typical movements. Spotting our identities alongside approximate schedules in his script twisted my gut uncomfortably. The most unsettling element wasn't the clutter or bedding. It was the dawning awareness that he'd observed our patterns, noting sleep cycles, vacant periods, and secure moments to descend for sustenance or hygiene. Scribbles captured fragments like _quote _93 _. Essentially, he'd mapped our existences as a schedule for his endurance. We descended again, sealed the attic access, and that evening Ethan affixed provisional fasteners to the ladder. Genuine deadbolts followed the next day for it and every third-story pane. Sleep eluded us beyond a single hour that night. In the ensuing weeks, each groan of the structure set my nerves on edge, and I'd frequently gaze upward, envisioning soft tread above. That individual crosses my mind now and then, and I'm truly uncertain which unnerves me deeper. The notion of an unknown presence overhead undetected for weeks, or the chilling possibility that absent those nocturnal noises, he could persist there presently, seamlessly weaving his existence into the overlooked crevices of our home. Spotting the lock-picking kit strewn on his surface confirmed we'd lingered at that inn excessively. But allow me to rewind. I'm Ashley, age 28 then, employed as a district supervisor for a network of fuel outlets. My colleague Victoria and I were en route to a 3-day summit in Idaho. The firm covered the leased vehicle and 3 evenings distant from our outlets. We selected the Sunset View Motel for its affordability, solid digital feedback, and proximity, around 20 minutes, to the venue. No luxuries, merely a stretched 2-level structure featuring exterior corridors. At reception, a senior gentleman sporting a silver mustache processed our arrival, swiped my payment method, and issued 2 access fobs with minimal chit-chat. We hauled our luggage along the slim steps to the upper level and located Unit 312. Victoria inserted the initial fob, swiped, but the indicator blinked crimson rather than emerald. She attempted the alternate, yielding identical failure. She let out a frustrated sigh, mentioned she'd hurry back downstairs to sort out the keys, and vanished down the steps, leaving me in the hallway with our luggage. I propped myself against the wall and began replying to emails on my phone. A couple of minutes later, a door creaked open at the corridor's distant end, and out came a guy in his mid-30s perhaps. His shirt was rumpled, paired with jeans, and he carried no bags. He approached me at a leisurely pace, eyes scanning each door label as if tallying them up. Upon arriving, he paused and inquired whether I'd spotted a flyer detailing breakfast hours that had slipped from the bulletin board. The query struck me as odd, given that the schedule appeared on stickers affixed to every room door, including ours, and was also displayed at the front desk below. I gestured toward the spot just past my shoulder and replied, quote, 94. He gave a nod, yet lingered, then probed about our origins, our reason for being there, and our employer. I offered brief, evasive responses regarding a nearby conference before returning my attention to my device. Footsteps echoed from the stairs behind him, and Victoria emerged holding fresh key cards. The moment he spotted her, he flashed a grin our way, wished us a pleasant stay, and retreated along the hall to his room. Once at the end, we entered 312, unloaded our stuff, and the encounter seemed trivial enough that it slipped our minds until much later that evening. The following hours passed in the room as we reviewed presentations, fielded messages from shop supervisors, and griped about the fool who'd set a Monday morning for the regional gathering. By 8 o'clock, we closed our laptops and opted for a nearby pizzeria suggested by the reception staff. I headed into the hallway ahead of Victoria, who was rummaging in her bag. The same fellow stood by the vending machine, gaze fixed on his phone. While securing our door, he glanced up with a smile. Quote, 95, he inquired, as if we were old acquaintances rather than unknowns. Quote, 96, I muttered, then proceeded to the elevator. As we went by, I accidentally caught sight of his display. It showed an overhead image of the parking area, with Victoria's vehicle smack in the center, its beach decal and plates unmistakable. I averted my stare abruptly, unsure if he'd caught me looking. My mind raced with rationalizations right away. Perhaps he was checking a rental vehicle. It could resemble hers. Or maybe I was overreacting. In the elevator, I described the image to Victoria. She furrowed her brow and dismissed it as likely some ordinary silver car, urging me to get more rest. We proceeded with dinner regardless, though I eyed the entrance warily whenever it swung open. Returning to the motel and crossing the lobby, I lingered by the counter. I suggested to Victoria that we alert the desk staff about the man, just for documentation's sake. She refused, pointing out our uncertainty about the car and her reluctance to stir issues or cause a fuss on our debut evening. At around 2 a.m., a faint scratching noise roused me. Initially, I assumed it originated from an adjacent room, but soon pinpointed it to our entrance. Someone was tampering with the lock from the exterior. I held my breath briefly, wondering if it was a dream. Then the sharp rush of fear confirmed my alertness. I extended my arm and nudged Victoria's shoulder. She attempted to turn over, but I hissed, quote, 97. She went rigid. We fixed our eyes on the door. The faint, persistent rasp continued, metal against metal from someone skilled and aiming for stealth. After about 30 seconds, it ceased. A subtle click followed, then retreating steps faded along the hallway. I eased from the bed soundlessly and peered through the viewer. The corridor stood deserted. No doors stirred, no figures moved. Yet, a short distance away by the vending machine, lay a screwdriver on the rug. One that hadn't been present earlier. I relayed this to Victoria, who cursed quietly. The deadbolt was already engaged, but I fastened the chain and hauled over a spare chair to jam beneath the knob. She perched on her bed's edge, phone clutched with the emergency dial ready, finger poised. We resolved that any further disturbance at the door would prompt a call to authorities. Sleep evaded us thereafter. We alternated peephole duty, rotating every 20 to 30 minutes, tracking the clock via our devices and straining for sounds. We caught echoes of doors, distant television, pipes groaning, but nothing approached our space again. As dawn's glow seeped past the drapes, we were both jittery and drained. At about 7, we descended to the front desk, luggage in tow, having resolved to cut our stay short. The check-in gentleman from earlier had departed. A young lady now manned the station. We recounted it all. The breakfast inquiry stranger, the parking lot photo of our vehicle, the door tampering, the dropped tool on the floor. Her face transformed utterly. She reached for the phone and summoned their security. A short time afterward, an elderly fellow dressed in a worn-out uniform entered the scene. He paid attention to our account, jotted it all down in his compact notepad, and promised to examine the surveillance footage while consulting the manager. He mentioned, however, that the third-floor walkway lacked any cameras, meaning that if anyone had approached our door, no recording would exist. He avoided calling it an overreaction on our part, yet his demeanor clearly showed he wasn't sensing the same level of concern we were. Victoria was eager to check out right then and head straight back home, ditching the conference entirely. I felt the same pull, but skipping a required regional gathering would have stirred up major trouble with our supervisor and the company higher-ups. We lingered in the lobby, debating the options, until we settled on a middle ground. We'd attend the conference, endure the key presentations, return to the hotel in the afternoon, pack up, and switch to another lodging. The morning at the event passed in a daze. We scarcely paid attention. During each interval, we'd glance at our phones, bracing for an unexpected call from an unfamiliar contact. But nothing turned up. By about 5 p.m., we headed back to Sunset View. The moment we entered the parking area and spotted a police car stationed close to the front office, a sinking feeling hit my gut. The same youthful receptionist from earlier approached us immediately. She explained that the security officer had chosen to inspect the room of the dubious guest. The individual had departed that morning without checking out at the counter. Upon entering, they discovered the space vacant. Yet spread across the table was a complete array of lock-picking instruments, arranged as if in a professional toolkit. She added that printed images of the parking area had been uncovered too, multiple shots featuring zoomed-in views of various license plates, Victoria's vehicle among them. Beside the bed stood a notepad bearing a roster of room numbers in rough printed script. Our suite, 312, appeared smack in the center of the lineup, highlighted with 2 underlines. Adjacent lay a creased map of the state, dotted with tiny notations along the highway that aligned with several other motels. The police requested we take a seat and provide official accounts. A detective informed us of comparable reports from a nearby county involving a person fitting the suspect's profile, lingering near budget lodgings, inquiring about details, observing female guests arriving and leaving, yet they'd never pinned anything prosecutable on him. That revelation only heightened my unease rather than easing it, suggesting this fit into a recurring scheme. The motel promptly issued a full refund and proposed a complimentary stay at one of their affiliated locations, but we turned it down without hesitation. Instead, We reserved a suite at a prominent downtown hotel, shelling out 3 times the sunset view rate. And even then, we verified the door lock repeatedly before attempting rest. To this day, I'm uncertain about the intruder's exact intentions. Why our room number stood out so prominently on his roster, or what might have unfolded had I not stirred at the sound of scratching outside. Still, whenever I recall that screwdriver lying on the floor, I'm simply relieved we treated it as a real threat instead of brushing it off. For the past 8 months, I've held down a job as the overnight security watch at a sprawling medical supply depot in Portland. The structure is enormous, featuring 2 extended sections flanking a long-abandoned central administrative area that's seen no action in ages. My hours span from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., and typical evenings unfold just as you'd imagine. Patrols every hour, monitoring feeds, sipping coffee, handling calls, and cycling through it all again. Coming from stints in bar protection and shoplifting deterrence, these serene shifts in a deserted storage facility struck me as a jackpot, or at minimum tolerable. That particular evening kicked off routinely. I swiped my badge, logged in, reviewed the upkeep reports. All clear. At midnight, I launched into my initial complete sweep, starting with the west section as usual. Testing the fire escapes, inspecting the dock entrances, sweeping my light along the gaps between stacked gear crates. All seemed in order. I proceeded through the hallway, skirting the disused admin zone. Its panes were pitch black, revealing only faint outlines of furniture and storage inside. The entryway's glass panel was secured externally with a chain and an ancient padlock. I gave it a quick look, moved on, completed the eastern side, noted 00012 clear in the record, and returned to the control room to idly stream a program on my device. Just past 2 a.m., a muffled bang echoed from far within the eastern area. It jolted me enough to halt the video and straighten up, though it didn't signal outright crisis. More like a hefty container dropping onto the floor. I scanned the relevant camera views for that wing. Deserted pathways, shrink-wrapped loads, no motion. Merchandise occasionally adjusts when piled tall. Reporting every minor creak to the boss would label me the overly cautious type no one respected. I noted the time, entered 2:05 isolated bump east wing, monitors okay, resumed the show, but dialed down the audio and stayed vigilant with the screens. Roughly 20 minutes on, another bang resounded. Identical tone, yet nearer, originating around the building's core by the admin section. This impact vibrated right through to my workstation. I skipped checking the cameras altogether. Something about the situation triggered that raw urge to confront trouble head-on. The kind of knot in your gut right before chaos erupts. Snatching my flashlight, I fastened my radio to my shoulder and strode down the primary hallway toward the eastern section at a measured pace. No sense dashing if it turned out to be a false alarm. Still, I needed a direct view of the spot, not some distant feed. Once on the main level, I inspected the outer entrances. The security panels indicated they were secured, and the doors held firm under my tug. Next, I patrolled the pathway next to the administrative area, directing my beam through the stacks of shelves. Nothing stirred. Heading back, my eyes caught the chain dangling loosely on the glass entrance. with the padlock shattered into two halves on the ground. Keeping to the edge away from the pane, I illuminated the edges and found no signs of forced entry or shattered fragments. Peering in, I spotted workstations and seating all motionless. Regulations demanded notifying authorities for any intrusion, but that lock had seemed on its last legs ever since I began working here. The break looked rough and uneven, not sliced neatly. I reasoned it might have simply corroded away, snapped a fast picture for documentation, noted the timestamp, and returned to the entrance station. Settling into my seat, the clock neared 3 a.m. I accessed the feeds overlooking the admin zone, scanning each briefly, yet everything remained empty. As I stretched for the record ledger, intense headlamps flooded the front parking area. A white cargo vehicle eased past the barrier, bypassed the unloading area, and halted at the primary doors. Shipments never arrive at this hour. The operator stepped from the cab wearing a navy work coat and carrying a notepad, then approached the transparent panels to rap on them. I approached the control board, key fob gripped tightly, and, without releasing any latches, activated the speaker system to address him. He claimed it was a critical health-related shipment, requiring acknowledgement. I explained that I handled incoming goods only during regular operations and suggested he return at dawn. He fixed his gaze on me through the barrier for several moments, as if gauging my resolve, before acknowledging with a dip of his head and retreating to his ride. I observed him climb aboard, but rather than departing, he killed the beams and remained parked. Returning to the displays, I focused on the entryway view. The vehicle appeared as a shadowy mass in the corner of the shot. I saw him retrieve his mobile, press it against his face, and begin a conversation. No frantic gestures, just composed and unhurried, as though time was no issue. That unnerved me. Delivery personnel are typically hurried. They unload, get the okay, and speed off. They don't linger in pitch-black lots at 3 a.m. for drawn-out chats. After monitoring the screen's countdown for a bit, a weight settled in my midsection. I considered alerting my manager, but I could predict his response. Contact law enforcement if he tests an access point, otherwise just document it. I hated the thought of dialing emergency services over someone idling in a vehicle, yet I also disliked the risk of him slipping from sight if he circled to the rear. The surveillance at the docks leaves much to be desired. I decided that if the unease escalated, I'd summon help immediately and deal with the repercussions afterward. Meanwhile, I aimed to keep watch outdoors. Donning my coat, securing my radio, I exited via the lateral utility exit to circle the grounds. Ensuring it clicked shut behind me, I proceeded along the barrier, hugging the structure's wall. My palm hovered near the irritant spray on my hip. I deployed the light only when nearing an entry or barrier. No desire to draw extra attention to my position. From the distant edge, a motor hummed softly in the distance. The rebound off the walls made pinpointing it tricky at first. Rounding the bend at the eastern extension, it came into view. Another van was reversed toward the unloading bay, illumination off, but motor active. A pair of figures emerged from the rear holding beams. They murmured in low tones, cautious as if anticipating eavesdroppers. One matched the driver I'd encountered up front in the blue attire. The second stood higher, clad in a black pullover with the cowl drawn over his head. They closed the back panels and advanced directly to the very service portal I'd exited moments ago, acting as if it were their intended mark from the start. I ran the odds mentally. Them in a duo, me solo, armed only with aerosol defense, no immediate support. Circling back their way to re-enter seemed like placing myself squarely in their route. Instead, I pivoted from the wall and darted across the pavement toward the forward area, picking up speed while muting the thud of my footwear. Nearing the turn, my step plunged into a familiar crater. I overlook it every patrol. My ankle twisted sharply, sending me crashing onto my knees with force. My device slipped from my side and smacked the surface with a sharp snap. The duo whirled toward the noise, their lights locking onto me simultaneously. In the glare, I caught the driver's features and the shadow of the hood concealing the bigger man's gaze. The bigger guy yelled out a quick, furious phrase, and they picked up their pace heading straight for me. That did it. I bolted upright, snatched my phone without a glance, and dashed toward my vehicle in the primary parking area. Circling back to the entrance was out of the question. If they cut me off from that door, I'd be stuck between them and a secured structure. The lot seemed endless as I raced across it, but I fixed my gaze on my car. I mashed the unlock key repeatedly until the headlights blinked, flung the door wide, and dove into the driver's seat. I hit the lock button hard and ducked down low. My fingers trembled so badly that it took a couple of attempts to bring up the keypad. Finally, I dialed 911 on speakerphone and informed the operator about two suspicious men, likely attempting a break-in, adding that I was barricaded in my car near the warehouse. All the while, I scanned the rear view and side mirrors, bracing for anyone charging my way, but nobody showed. After what dragged on for 12 minutes, the initial police cruisers arrived. It seemed like an eternity, yet here they were. By then, the sweeping beams from their lights revealed the lot was empty. The vans had vanished. The cops verified my identification, confirmed I could stand without wobbling, and escorted me as they swept the premises. At the seldom-used service door to the admin section, we spotted tools strewn about, severed wiring, and a snapped chain segment on the pavement. The padlock bore recent scratches, and the alarm cable threaded through the frame had been yanked free. Clearly, they'd targeted the outdated admin area to slip past the bulk of the warehouse's detection systems. Later, back at my workstation, recounting the details with my knees aching and the rush fading away, it fully hit me. That initial delivery person was merely probing, checking if I was solo, gauging my response time, seeing if I'd balk at summoning aid. Had I brushed off the odd sound from the east section, or dismissed my nerves and remained seated instead of patrolling the grounds when I did, they might have breached the facility right as I lounged there, barely paying attention to my program. And truthfully, I prefer not to dwell on what choices they might have made for me once my value ran out. In 2022, I stepped into my initial supervisory role as the cleaning crew lead at Riverside Mall in the outskirts. I'm Tyler, 26 at the time. Up to that point, my experience was limited to hauling carts and mopping tiles, nothing about leading others. All at once, I had a workspace, a staff list, and a mall overseer expecting polished updates on hygiene metrics rather than spotting me with cleaning gear. It appeared straightforward. Draft timetables, stock essentials, address grievances. I figured it'd be straightforward, dull labor that cleared my mind once my shift ended. Then a food court supervisor rang my office line complaining, "Tyler, there's decay out here and folks blame our prep area." A maintenance worker lifted a ceiling panel, aimed his beam into the vent, and there it was. A decomposed rat fused to the ductwork, swollen and teeming with tiny offspring. We donned protective gear, sealed the remains in plastic, cleaned the accessible spots, doused it all in sanitizer until we were hacking. Yet the odor lingered over the eating zone for days as gripes flooded my messages. Roughly a week on, the burrito joint at the court's far end buzzed in, and the boss's voice carried real fear rather than irritation. Their bathroom commode had backed up, waste bubbling from the floor grate toward the seating space, prompting them to shut the barriers and post a scrawled notice. Once the pipes experts removed the fixture and probed the conduit, they extracted a compacted ball of low-grade tan paper towels jammed inside, forcing the eatery to shutter for 2 full days amid our deep clean and a fresh regulatory inspection. 3 days afterward, as I wrapped up the wastewater summary, guards alerted me via walkie about the kids' activity zone upstairs. A young child had vomited inside the ascent tube, splattering the mats and hitting a pair of other youngsters. Furious guardians were now berating the young attendants, who were clueless on next steps. Clad in one-time coveralls, hand protection, and respirators, we entered and spent nearly 3 hours peeling fabrics, packing waste, scouring surfaces, and documenting for public health officials. The area remained off-limits the rest of the shift for thorough decontamination. At that stage, I was wryly telling my crew the place was hexed. But heading home, my gut remained knotted, and the quip lost its humor. It dawned on me that these incidents weren't coincidental. Somewhere along the line, shortcuts were happening. Faulty air shafts, disposables dumped in drains rather than bins, perishables left out too long, and my squad served as the final barrier against penalties and closures. The salary was essential, and I refused to let Riverside devolve into that notorious eyesore from online rants. Thus, I pushed to tackle issues proactively, even if it often felt like I alone carried the concern. The phone call that confirmed the problem went way beyond routine. Cleanup came from the basement storage area where the shops stored their surplus inventory. A flustered apparel inventory worker described a foul stench building up near their shelves. I agreed to head down personally, accompanied by the health inspector who was already in the building. The moment we swung open the fire door into the lower-level hallway, that thick, cloying scent hit us, the one I'd come to identify all too well. It intensified with each stride toward the remote end of the storage space. The worker gestured at a stack of crates against the wall. We shifted them out of the way, revealing a gnawed opening at the base of the sheetrock that opened into a tight maintenance area no blueprint had ever shown me. Crouching with my light, I peered in and spotted rodents swarming amid ripped boxes and shredded wrappers from food supplies, piles of feces in the angles, and crates that once contained airtight treats for the upper-level stands, now mangled. The inspector kept his tone even, but he stated plainly that this went far past a simple vermin problem. It qualified as a major health code breach that might shut down operations if word got out. So we had to bring in expert rodent control right away. The pest management team arrived first thing the following day. I greeted them at the loading dock and guided them below before the center opened for business. Just beyond the storage entrance in the hallway, the supervisor recapped the plan. They'd place toxin pellets and snares in the maintenance area and follow the rodents' paths. We'd secure the entrance, no entry or exit for several days. Then we'd return as a group to handle the remains. Straightforward measures. Gruesome, yet straightforward. I completed their paperwork, observed as they donned protective suits and respirators, then wriggled through the bitten gap carrying their beams and lure devices, acting like it was just another shift. They wrapped up quicker than anticipated. The head tech advised, wait at least 4 days. Don't touch this entry without me. He explained the bulk of the group would perish right there. Perhaps a couple might stumble into the open and collapse amid the stock, but regardless, everything required containment and removal via their waste handlers. I secured the storage myself, instructed guards to record any visits to that section, and essentially quarantined it like a hazard site. No one griped. No one cared to approach that odor anyhow. 4 days on, we regrouped at the identical entrance. Even through my breathing gear, the reek poured forth the instant the bolt clicked. That dense, acrid tang had amplified, signaling the chemicals had taken effect. I slipped into a one-use jumpsuit, sealed the seams, tugged on heavy-duty mitts, and double-checked my face shield's seal from force of habit. The team suited up nearby with minimal chatter. One passed me a spool of heavy-duty sacks marked for bio-waste and muttered, quote, 100. I stayed silent. We cleared the crates from the gnawed breach and entered the maintenance spot. Now carcasses littered the floor, sprawled across the slab and matted in the ripped padding. Some rigid, others already liquefying into the surface. We formed a chain. I'd gather with a broad spade. A teammate would open the sack, tie it off, and push it aside. Conversation stayed limited to warnings like, quote, 101 or, quote, 102. I aim to view them as refuse, not creatures. Gather, hoist, dump, bind, advance. At times, the blade glided beneath a form that yielded too readily, and I realized it was partly decayed. Adhered. Those we pried loose. I focused on the tool's edge rather than the shapes, just gauging placement. It felt rote, but my gut nodded throughout. In the distant angle, a massive rodent lay flipped, easily double the rest's bulk. It rested in crusted froth and debris by the barrier. I urged myself, bag it quick and proceed. I stooped, eased the spade beneath its midsection, and as the steel made contact, the entire frame convulsed. Forepaws feebly scratched the ground. The skull rose slightly, and it emitted a faint, ragged chirp. I recoiled sharply, banging the partition and nearly losing my grip on the spade. For an instant, I figured the haze from the gear was playing tricks. Yet the creature attempted to haul ahead, rear section scarcely functional. 4 talons gouged faint trails on the slab. It strove to flee, but weakness overtook it. It lurched in spasmodic, disoriented motions, more gliding than striding. A pest handler noticed, approached steadily, and slammed his spade down decisively. The form spasmed once more and went still. He prodded it with his toe, remarked, quote 103, and resumed his task seamlessly. My chest tightened. I said I required a break, exited the storage, traversed the passage, and yanked off my mask. My fingers trembled enough to nearly let it fall. The atmosphere below wasn't particularly clean, but it beat inhaling via the death-tainted barrier. A short while after, the pest control guy trailed behind me and assured me there was no need to stress. It occurred occasionally. Certain critters proved tougher against the toxins. He mentioned they'd thoroughly inspected the space, and I simply needed to continue assisting with the bagging. We wrapped up the tidying in just a couple of hours. All noticeable remains ended up in airtight containers. Each snare was examined, and the team recorded the counts for the official documentation. The repair crew arrived, sealed the gap in the wall, and then sealed off every fissure they spotted near that utility area with foam. We doused the ground and base of the walls with sanitizer until the cement glistened with moisture, then set up blowers in the storage facility while keeping the entrance secured. Afterward, I headed right to the modest employee rinse room in the utility zone, tossed my gear into the hazardous waste receptacle, scoured my skin as if cleanliness were impossible, and slipped into the extra outfits stashed in my storage unit. Despite the wash-up, a grimy sensation lingered, as though residue clung stubbornly. That evening, several hours post-arrival at my place, unease set in. Shivers, a mild rise in temperature, a persistent ache in my skull. Symptoms intensified, and my mind fixated on that chamber, the scrape of the tool, the survivor that wouldn't yield. By morning, I sought immediate medical attention. The physician evaluated me, heard the account, and frowned at the details involving the rodents and potential exposure. He prescribed antimicrobial meds, advised tracking the heat, and urged initiating a series of rabies inoculations as a precaution, despite the slim odds. Those injections hammered in how I'd tempted fate. I took a 7-day medical break, bedridden, perspiring, obsessively noting my vitals and replying to irrelevant job messages. The incident looped endlessly in my thoughts, crystallizing my desire to exit that role. Beyond the revolting aspects, it was the perpetual dread of a single slip leading to disaster, with higher-ups indifferent as long as operations continued. Upon return, I completed the transition, submitted the final paperwork, then entered the supervisor's space and submitted my notice to depart. 30 days on, I found myself in a tech firm's workspace, troubleshooting faulty copiers and access codes rather than pest infestations, and it ranked as my smartest move ever. In the summer of 2023, I held a position with a laundry service that collected and returned garments right from clients' residences. Each dawn, I'd receive my itinerary via the application, pack the freshly pressed items, collect the vacant sacks, and proceed to tackle the lineup of stops. Folks would pass me bundles of soiled laundry. I'd exchange them for shrouded hangers, log the receipt, and continue. Following 3 years navigating essentially identical paths, I recognized residents' homes, typical greeters, even properties with finicky entrances. Individuals would crack the door, mutter a greeting, thrust a parcel my way, and vanish before my appreciation fully landed. Yet roughly a year back, a particular dwelling on the circuit shifted it from routine hum to something noteworthy. Amid the addresses sat a duplex home in a serene, upscale district. A fellow called David resided there. On my initial delivery to him, he shared that he coded remotely and I'd reliably find him in during daylight. From then, he became a steady patron, bi-weekly without fail. Tuesdays marked his drop-off, with Wednesdays for checking fresh pickups. David ranked among my smoothest calls. I'd arrive, snag his laundered attire from the holder, and as I approached the entry, he'd swing it wide. A quick acknowledgement, perhaps inquiring about post-holiday volume. He'd accept the encased hooks, offer the soiled bundle, and retreat. One Tuesday near 10 a.m., I approached his place as usual, countless visits prior. I curbed the vehicle, retrieved his prepared load, and strode the brief walkway to the entrance. As I extended toward the chime, the panel parted inward. But David wasn't the figure there. Instead, an unfamiliar man filled the frame, one I'd never encountered at the property. He appeared somewhat junior to David, perhaps 30-ish, lanky without being imposing, disheveled locks and nascent beard, clad in lounge pants and a sleeveless shirt, sockless, shoeless, toes on the corridor tile. He grinned as if we were acquaintances and extended arms for the bundle. Quote 104, he remarked. Quote 105, quote 106, David around, quote 107. Sure he's catching Z's? I'll handle it, the guy replied. His words flowed swift, almost scripted, without a backward peek inside. Superficially, it held up. Perhaps the guy was just a sibling crashing there or a fresh tenant. Frankly, it wasn't any of my concern. My role boils down to dropping off fresh laundry, grabbing the soiled stuff, and moving on to the following stop. So I passed him the sack containing David's freshly laundered items. He accepted it, angled his body to block much of the entrance, muttered a quick thank you, and retreated into the house. Come Wednesday morning, my delivery circuit brought me back to that identical district. Even if a client misses their collection, I typically circle back the following day on the off chance they overlooked setting out their bundle. David fell into that category, so I pulled up in the usual parking space and approached his walkway once more, hands empty. No laundry bag sat on the porch, and there wasn't any message affixed to the entrance. I had just raised my fist to rap on the wood when the knob twisted and the door swung open anew. The identical fellow from yesterday appeared, now dressed in denim pants and a simple tee, still without shoes. He informed me, nothing to clean today, and shut the door promptly. I headed out that Wednesday, yet the visit to David's lingered in my thoughts. Normally, I erase a location from my mind the instant I drive off, but that shoeless stranger kept popping into my head. No additional vehicle in the drive, no word of a housemate. And I recalled David mentioning he preferred solitude so he could focus on his work undisturbed. I dismissed it as trivial and wrapped up my rounds. Friday dawned with my supervisor phoning me mid-route, prompting me to pull to the curb. She inquired, "Have you handled any pickups or deliveries for David this week?" I explained that I'd delivered his clean batch on Tuesday, but he hadn't handed over any dirty laundry, and Wednesday yielded 0 items outside. She noted that David had contacted her, claiming he hadn't received clean garments for weeks. I countered that I'd been making the drops consistently. Some fellow kept accepting the deliveries at the threshold. I sketched a picture of the younger individual I'd encountered on 2 occasions. Tousled hair, scruffy beard, relaxed attire, perpetually barefoot. She fell silent, then placed me on hold to confer directly with David. Upon returning, her tone had sharpened. He insists he resides solo, entertains no visitors, and has no clue about the person you're describing. Furthermore, he claims he hasn't spotted you in weeks. Apparently, another man has been answering the door, leading him to assume we'd switched couriers. I gazed blankly at the instrument panel and assured her I'd stuck to that path throughout. We both grasped that this went beyond a mere oversight, that an unauthorized individual had entry to his home. She instructed me to rendezvous at David's address in an hour so we could resolve it jointly. I consented immediately, as that conversation left me unwilling to approach that entrance by myself. 60 minutes later, we stationed our vehicle close to his driveway, strolled along the path, and pressed the doorbell side by side. The one who answered was the very David I'd known from countless prior visits. He appeared puzzled by our dual presence. My boss presented herself, followed by introducing me, and I clarified that I was the regular delivery person for the spot. David scowled and remarked he hadn't laid eyes on me lately, just the unfamiliar one. I reiterated that I'd never deviated from the schedule and recapped the intruder's appearance once more. Younger, unkempt facial hair, everyday garb, invariably shoeless in the entryway. While I spoke, David's complexion drained of color, and he murmured he suspected the identity. He revealed that over recent weeks, he'd observed provisions vanishing from the refrigerator, stray mugs scattered about, and several tops missing from his wardrobe. One evening, he'd even caught sounds of pacing below while toiling in his study, inspected the areas, discovered zilch, and chalked it up to fatigue and insomnia. My supervisor probed whether anyone else possessed a spare key, perhaps a former partner, buddy, or the property owner. He denied it with a head shake. "Only me. I've dwelled here in isolation for years," he stated. Then he added that if an intruder had invaded his space, he demanded immediate clarity, and we ought to investigate. He guided us across the ground level, pulling open cupboard panels and peering beneath furnishings. Yet all seemed in order. Next, he unlatched the cellar access from the galley, flicked the illumination, and we descended the steps sequentially. In the distant nook, concealed by piled cartons, he halted, shifted a container, and there it was. A worn bedding on the bare floor, a coverlet, and sacks of provisions. Roughly 2 decades back, precisely this past August, I landed a gig overseeing a home at a rural marina club just beyond Seattle's edges. At 30, I was a self-employed shutterbug navigating gaps between extended gigs, and I'd been silently panicking over finances and gigs for some time. The establishment was owned by an affluent clan that had previously tapped me for capturing family celebrations and fundraisers. Thus, when they mentioned heading to Europe for 3 weeks and requiring an on-premises watcher to mind the premises, it struck me as a straightforward opportunity. Beyond the seasonal shutdown meant no visitors, solely me patrolling the grounds, solid compensation, and complimentary lodging. My quarters were the former groundskeeper's cabin on a modest rise overlooking the piers. Single sleeping area, compact cooking space, and a workstation they hauled in for my use. Through the basin's pane, the entire setup unfolded before me. The primary structure housed the dining area and meeting spaces, alongside the extended pier where out-of-use vessels were secured and shrouded, a row of low-slung storage units, and the unpaved path leading to the entrance. The proprietors guided me around the entire site the previous day prior to their departure, passing along a hefty keychain and a directory of contacts, while stressing twice that no visitors were anticipated on the premises. Should anyone appear, contact us or authorities. Avoid handling it solo, the spouse instructed. Back then, it seemed like unnecessary worry. That initial week passed uneventfully. Each morning I'd release the locks on the central facility, stroll past the deserted eatery and workspaces, collect any correspondence from the modest reception counter, then position my computer in a meeting space to revise past footage. As dusk approached, I'd wander beside the shoreline near the pier to escape the glow of my display. No nearby residences were visible, only foliage and the distant hum of traffic. Thus, by the third or fourth evening, I'd grown oblivious to my true isolation. Subtle anomalies began to catch my eye. Prior to any blatant incidents, I spotted a plastic seat on the eatery's rear patio, positioned slightly askew from its prior spot. And one dawn, the chain securing the entrance gate was threaded through an unfamiliar notch. I dismissed it as breezes or maintenance by the caretaker before his exit, something I'd overlooked. Isolation all day long prompts doubts about your recollections. Eventually, I shrugged it off. On the 8th evening, returning from my stroll near 6 p.m., I noticed the front entrance to the primary structure was ajar. Not fully agape, merely unlatched. I was certain I'd secured it that morning and tested the knob as per habit. For a moment I paused, straining for sounds within, then chided my paranoia and ascended the stairs. Pushing the door gently, it eased inward. The foyer lay shadowy, yet vacant. I flipped the primary illumination, announced my presence once, and inspected the ground level. Dining spot, lounge, prep area, compact workspace. No signs of disturbance. I figured the mechanism hadn't engaged properly, and a draft had handled the rest. I refastened it, tugged firmly to verify, patrolled the perimeter once, and retreated to the residence to process images. The following dawn, I returned to the core building for the customary mail retrieval. Upon climbing to the upper level, a whiff of tobacco lingered in the hallway. Subtle, yet recent. I abstain from smoking. The proprietors do too, and the structure had remained sealed for days. The panes scarcely admitted air, making it unlikely to be wafting from afar. Midway along the passage, one meeting room portal stood ajar. I recalled shutting them all. Within, atop the surface by the lead seat, a cigarette stub had been extinguished beside a partially consumed plastic flask. Cupping my palm above the residue, warmth persisted. The intruder had departed mere moments earlier. I withdrew untouched, bolted the entry, and phoned the owners from the exterior. It was midnight in Paris, yet they answered promptly. I described the unsecured entry, the odor, the remnant, and the container. The husband fell silent. then mentioned alerting the nearby law enforcement and urged me to return to the overseer's dwelling, barricade myself inside, and steer clear of the structures until help arrived. Those 40 minutes dragged beyond the prior week's entirety. I traversed from pane to portal, device clutched, scanning the stone lane and mentally revisiting the acrid scent, pondering if an observer lurked nearby, eyeing me. When the cruiser arrived at last, a pair of deputies emerged and signaled toward the residence before proceeding to the chief edifice. They radioed for details on the Discovery's locations, then conducted a thorough, deliberate sweep, beginning with the dining and admin areas, progressing to the tool enclosures, and finally, the vessel shelter at the pier's edge. No individual turned up. During their repeat examination of the core structure, they delved further into the upper-level archives, shifting aged crates and piles of weathered flotation gear. There it was, a coiled bedroll tucked behind the vests, multiple drained tins, and an inexpensive beacon. An individual had been bedding down there for several nights at minimum, directly overhead the vacant dining zone I'd traversed as if it were my domain. The deputies suggested it was likely a vagrant who had slipped onto the estate and deemed it preferable to urban hazards. They fitted a sturdier mechanism on the primary access and recommended dialing if oddities arose. The subsequent pair of days remained serene, and I endeavored to assure myself the fellow had vanished permanently, deterred by the authorities and the upgraded security. I went about my tasks, replying to messages and periodically scanning the windows while patrolling the path and docks as if it were routine. On the third day, near midday, I was organizing pictures at the tiny table inside the cabin when a sudden smash of shattering glass echoed from the main house. I rushed to the window and spotted a first-floor side pane in pieces, with shards scattered on the outer gravel, though no one was in sight. My hands trembled as I dialed the police once more, informing the operator that a window had been smashed and I was the only one on the grounds. During the wait, I hovered near the cabin's window, but stayed positioned to the side, avoiding exposure like an easy mark, and kept my eyes fixed on the large structure. Roughly 10 minutes in, just as doubt crept in about the noise being real, a quick shadow darted across a second-story window. It lasted only an instant, but it confirmed someone was inside. I relayed to the dispatcher that I'd spotted motion within, and she assured me the officers were en route. The squad car arrived about 15 minutes afterward, and the familiar pair of deputies headed directly to the damaged pane, entered the building, then approached the cabin to instruct me to remain in place. They combed through the primary house, storage outbuildings, and boathouse once more, but turned up empty. One deputy noted how the broken window overlooked the woods, suggesting the intruder likely fled that direction upon hearing the sirens, and it was undoubtedly the same individual attempting to reclaim his shelter. Once they departed, the silence felt more oppressive than ever, since it was clear he was now bold enough to force entry with me present, rather than skulking about only when the site was deserted. I scarcely rested that evening, haunted by the realization that he'd likely observed me for days, timing his move for when I seemed off guard or preoccupied. By the following morning's later hours, I resolved I couldn't simply hole up in the cabin indefinitely. Thus, at about 3 p.m., I devised a ruse to feign departure. I gathered my camera gear, stepped outside, shut the cabin door with extra force, climbed into my vehicle in plain view, and exited via the gate as though calling it quits for the day. The moment I could on the roadway, I circled back, hid the car among the trees, along a narrow path, secured it, and slipped silently through the forest until the structures came into view. I hunkered down amid the underbrush, phone and camera at the ready, monitoring the main building's lateral door while holding perfectly still in anticipation. Near 5 o'clock, a door swung open, and a fellow with a knapsack emerged, heading my way toward the cabin. I snapped photos up close as he jiggled the locked entrance, prowled around the perimeter, and gazed through the panes. As he veered off toward the pier, I promptly contacted the authorities with his details. They apprehended him, revealing he'd squatted there for weeks. They displayed a knife he'd carried, and once the proprietors arrived, I packed up and vowed never to take on remote oversight roles again.